Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. I'm Lucy, 34. I saw my face carved into a tree at Gifford Pinchot National Forest. We'd been planning this trip for months. Derek, my husband of 6 years, and I needed the escape. Our marriage had been fraying at the edges, worn thin by his long hours at the firm and my growing resentment of the life we'd built in Seattle. The RV was Derek's idea, a 32-foot Winnebago he'd bought off Craigslist without consulting me first. Another decision made in isolation. But I'd agreed to the trip because some part of me still hoped we could find our way back to each other in the silence of the woods. Gifford Pinchot sprawled across the Cascade Range in southern Washington, all dense Douglas fir and hemlock, cut through with volcanic ridges and hidden lakes. We'd chosen a dispersed camping area off Forest Road 25, past the popular spots where the ranger station's tired attendant had barely looked up from his crossword puzzle when Derek asked about the best secluded sites. "Road gets rough past mile marker 47, the ranger had said, his voice flat. "Most folks don't go that far." "Perfect," Derek replied, that familiar edge of competition in his tone. He always had to go further, push harder, prove something to no one in particular. The RV jostled over potholes and exposed roots as we climbed deeper into the forest. Late September had painted the underbrush in rust and gold, though the evergreens remained defiant in their green. The air through the open windows carried the scent of decaying leaves and something else, something faintly metallic that I couldn't place. "We should stop soon," I said, watching the odometer. We'd passed mile marker 52 10 minutes ago. The road had narrowed to barely more than a trail, branches scraping against the RV's sides with sounds like fingernails on metal. Just a bit further. Derek's jaw was set in that stubborn line I knew too well. I saw a clearing on the map. "What map? Your phone hasn't had signal for the last hour." He didn't answer, just kept driving. The clearing, when we finally reached it, opened up suddenly. A perfect circle of flat ground surrounded by towering firs that seemed to lean inward, as if listening. The afternoon light filtered through the canopy in dusty beams, illuminating particles that danced like ash. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest tight. Derek killed the engine and the silence rushed in. Not the peaceful quiet I'd imagined, but something heavier, expectant. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned this place. "This is it," Derek said, climbing out of the driver's seat with the forced enthusiasm he used during depositions. "This is perfect." I followed him outside, my sneakers crunching on the carpet of needles. The air was cooler here, despite the sun still visible through gaps in the trees. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. "Derek, this feels—" "What? It feels what?" He turned to face me, and I saw the challenge in his eyes. Everything had become a fight lately. "Nothing. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. As he began leveling the RV and hooking up the external water tank, I walked the perimeter of the clearing. The trees formed an almost perfect ring, their trunks massive and scarred. I ran my hand along the rough bark of the nearest one, feeling the deep grooves, and I jerked my hand back. There, carved into the bark at eye level, was a face. My face. My heart hammered as I stepped closer, certain I was mistaken. But no. The features were too specific, too accurate. The slight upturn of my nose, the widow's peak in my hairline, even the small scar on my left eyebrow from a childhood fall. The carving was weathered, the edges smoothed by time and rain, as if it had been there for years. "Derek!" My voice came out strangled. He looked up from adjusting the stabilizing jacks, irritation flickering across his face. "What? Come here, look at this." He walked over, his boots heavy on the ground. I pointed at the carving, my hand shaking. Derek leaned in, squinting. "It's just a tree carving. People do that. It's my face. Lucy, it's a rough outline. You're seeing what you want to see. I'm not. Look at it. The scar, the nose, everything." He studied it for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe, or recognition. But then he shook his head. It's a coincidence. The human brain is wired to see faces in everything. Clouds, toast, tree bark. It's called pareidolia. I know what pareidolia is. My throat felt tight. This is different. We just drove 6 hours. You're tired. He touched my shoulder, his hand heavy and perfunctory. Let's set up camp, have dinner, open that wine you packed. You'll feel better. I wanted to argue, to make him see what I was seeing, but exhaustion crept through my bones, and the thought of another fight made me feel hollow. Fine. Okay. But as we walked back to the RV, I glanced over my shoulder at the carving. In the shifting light, the eyes seemed to follow me. We ate dinner in near silence. Freeze-dried beef stroganoff that tasted like salted cardboard. Derek had wanted to build a fire, but I'd convinced him to wait until after we ate. The sun was setting earlier these days, and I didn't want to be fumbling around in the dark. Through the RV's windows, I watched the shadows lengthen and merge, the clearing transforming into something unfamiliar. Derek scrolled through his phone even though there was no signal, a habit he couldn't break. "I'm going to get firewood," he announced, standing abruptly. "Make yourself useful and find the lighter fluid." The casual cruelty in his tone made my chest ache. When had we become these people? He disappeared outside, and I heard the storage compartment open and close. I found the lighter fluid under the sink, along with matches and a camp stove we hadn't needed. As I gathered the supplies, movement outside the window caught my eye. Derek stood at the tree line, his back to me, completely still. So still that for a moment I thought he was a statue, a trick of the fading light. Then he bent down, picked up something from the ground, and turned back toward the RV. His arms were full of branches, but his face, even from this distance, even in the dimness, looked wrong. Too smooth, too blank, like a mask. I blinked, and he was normal. Derek again, scowling at the weight of the wood in his arms. "You okay?" I called through the open door. "Fine, just hurry up with that fluid." We built the fire together, not speaking, Derek arranging the wood in a precise pyramid while I squirted chemical-smelling liquid over it. The first match caught immediately, flames leaping up with unnatural eagerness. Derek sat back on the portable chairs we'd set up, cracking open a beer. I poured wine into a metal camping cup, the cheap red almost black in the firelight. The flames cast shadows that seemed to move independently of their source, dancing across Derek's face and making his features alien. "Do you think we're going to make it?" I asked quietly. "Make it where?" "Us. Do you think we're going to make it?" He took a long pull from his beer, staring into the fire. "I don't know, Lucy. I honestly don't know anymore." The honesty hurt more than a lie would have. I drank my wine, feeling it burn down my throat. That's when I heard it, a sound like a child crying, distant but distinct coming from deep in the forest. I sat up straight. "Did you hear that?" Derek frowned. "Hear what?" "That. Crying. There's a kid out there." We both fell silent, listening. The sound came again, high and pitiful, echoing through the trees. "Jesus," Derek muttered, standing up. "Some idiot probably brought their family camping and the kid wandered off. We should help." I was already on my feet, grabbing the flashlight from the RV's door pocket. Or, we should mind our own business. "Derek, it's a child." He sighed, that long-suffering sound he'd perfected. "Fine. But we're staying together." The crying led us into the forest, our flashlights cutting weak paths through the darkness. The sound seemed to move, always just ahead, drawing us deeper. The trees pressed close here, their branches interlocking overhead to block out even the moonlight. My heart pounded against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out. "We're here to help. Can you tell us where you are?" The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it made my ears ring. "Kid?" Derek's voice was harder, more commanding. "This isn't funny. Come out now." Nothing. No response. No rustle of movement. Even the wind had died. Derek grabbed my arm. "We're going back. This is stupid." "But now, Lucy." We turned around, but the path we'd taken, marked in my mind by the specific arrangement of fallen logs and distinctive trees, wasn't there. Instead, identical trunks stretched in every direction, a labyrinth of bark and shadow. "Where's the clearing?" My voice cracked. We couldn't have come this far. Derek swept his flashlight in a wide arc. "It's this way. I remember." "You remember? You didn't even want to come out here. Are you seriously starting this right now?" "I'm not starting anything. I'm just saying that I'm wrong. You're saying I'm wrong, like always." The fight bubbled up between us, familiar and bitter. We'd had this same argument in different forms 100 times. But here, in the dark, with the child's cries still echoing in my memory, it felt obscene. "Let's just pick a direction," I said quietly. "We'll find our way back." We chose what Derek swore was east, walking in tense silence. The forest seemed to shift around us, trees rearranging themselves in impossible ways. My flashlight beam caught something pale ahead, a trunk lighter than the others. As we got closer, my stomach dropped. It was another carving, another face, but this time it was Derek's face, rendered in the same weathered detail, down to the small mole beneath his right eye. Derek. I couldn't manage more than a whisper. He saw it. I watched the blood drain from his face, watched his jaw work soundlessly. For the first time since I'd known him, Derek looked genuinely frightened. "What the fuck is this?" He touched the carving with trembling fingers. "What the actual fuck?" "I don't know. Someone's messing with us. This is some kind of sick joke. How would anyone know we'd be here? We didn't tell anyone where we were going." He rounded on me. "So what? You think this is supernatural? Magic trees that carve people's faces? I think we need to get back to the RV. Now." We ran. The logical part of my brain knew running in the dark woods was dangerous, that we could trip over roots or stumble into a ravine, but terror overrode logic. The flashlights bounced wildly, illuminating trees that all looked the same, branches that grabbed at our clothes like skeletal fingers. I don't know how long we ran, minutes that felt like hours, before we burst back into the clearing. The RV sat exactly where we'd left it, the fire still burning beside it, our chairs positioned as if we'd never left. We collapsed, gasping. My lungs burned and my legs trembled. Derek bent over, hands on his knees, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. "We're leaving," he said between breaths. "First thing tomorrow. We're leaving." I nodded, unable to speak. We doused the fire and retreated into the RV, locking every door and window. The familiar interior should have felt safe, but the walls seemed thin as paper. Derek pulled the curtains shut, blocking out the darkness beyond. "Try to sleep," he said, though his voice shook. "We'll leave at first light." I climbed into the bed above the cabin, and Derek took the converted dinette below. Neither of us changed into pajamas. I lay in the darkness, fully clothed, listening to Derek's ragged breathing and the settling sounds of the RV. Sleep felt impossible, but exhaustion pulled me under. I woke to silence. Complete, absolute silence. No forest sounds, no Derek's breathing, nothing. "Derek!" My voice seemed swallowed by the air itself. No response. I climbed down from the bed, my joints stiff and aching. The RV was empty. Derek's shoes were gone from beside the door, but his jacket hung on its hook. It was freezing. My breath misted in front of my face. The heater had shut off at some point during the night. I checked my phone. 3:47 a.m. No signal, as expected, but the time display seemed to flicker, the numbers briefly rearranging themselves before settling back. "Derek?" Louder this time. I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The clearing was transformed. Where there had been dirt and pine needles, now there was frost. Thick and crystalline, coating every surface in silver. But it was September, far too early and too warm for frost. The fire pit was cold, the ashes scattered, and there, in the frost, were footprints. Derek's boots heading into the forest, but beside his prints were others, smaller like a child's bare feet. My stomach knotted. The crying. Had he heard it again and gone to investigate alone? "Derek!" I screamed his name into the darkness. "This isn't funny." Only silence answered. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the tracks. The frost made them easy to see, each print preserved in perfect detail. The small footprints were strange, the toes too long, the heel too narrow. Not quite human. The trail led to a tree. Derek's tree, the one with his face carved into it. But now there were words beneath the carving, fresh cuts in the bark. She follows. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight. Derek, where are you? The forest around me felt alive, watching. The trees leaned in, their branches reaching. I spun in a circle, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, catching glimpses of faces. Everywhere I looked, the trees bore carvings. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe. All different faces, men and women and children, carved at various heights. Some weathered and ancient, some so fresh the sap still wept from the cuts. And moving between the trees, just at the edge of my light's reach, were figures. Pale and thin, walking with joints that bent wrong. They stayed just beyond clear sight, but I could feel their eyes on me. Lucy! Derek's voice from somewhere ahead. I ran toward it, my breath coming in gasps, the cold air burning my lungs. I found him in another clearing, smaller than ours, the ground bare of vegetation. He stood in the center, his back to me, perfectly still. Derek, thank God. We need to go. We need to... He turned around. It was Derek's face, Derek's body, Derek's clothes, but the eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like looking into wells. And his smile. Jesus. His smile was too wide, stretching his face in ways that made my vision swim. "Hello, Lucy," he said in Derek's voice, but with an undertone like wind through hollow trees. "You're not Derek." I backed away, the flashlight shaking in my grip. "I'm exactly Derek." He took a step toward me, his movement fluid and wrong. "I'm every version of Derek. The one who loves you, the one who resents you, the one who wishes he'd never met you. I'm all of it. Where is he? What did you do with my husband? He's here." Not Derek gestured around the clearing. "He's everywhere. They all are." More figures emerged from the trees. I recognized some of them from the carvings. Faces I'd glimpsed in the bark now animated, walking, wearing skin like ill-fitting clothes. An elderly woman with eyes milky as fog. A teenage boy whose neck bent at an impossible angle. A little girl whose feet didn't quite touch the ground. "What are you?" The words came out as a whimper. "We're what remains when the forest takes what it's owed." Not Derek's smile never wavered. "This land remembers every person who entered and never left. We're the echoes, the impressions, the faces in the bark. I don't understand. You will." He reached out and I saw that his fingers were too long, the joints too numerous. "When we carve you into the trees, when we wear your skin and learn your walk, then you'll understand." I ran. Behind me I heard laughter. Derek's laugh mixed with others, a chorus of stolen voices. Footsteps pursued me. Too many footsteps, moving too fast. The forest was a maze of shadows and grasping branches. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. My flashlight died, plunging me into absolute darkness. I kept running, my hands outstretched, colliding with trees, stumbling over roots. Something brushed against my back. Fingers or branches, I couldn't tell. Then, impossibly, I saw light ahead. The RV. I'd somehow found my way back to the clearing. I burst through the door, slammed it shut, and locked it. My hands fumbled with the keys still hanging from the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice. It caught. I threw the RV into reverse, not caring about the gear or the road. The vehicle lurched backward, branches screaming against the sides. Through the windshield, I saw them. Dozens of figures emerging from the forest, all wearing faces that didn't belong to them. They watched as I fled, their expressions unchanging. I found the road, or something like it, and drove. The odometer spun backward. The radio turned itself on, cycling through static and voices speaking in tongues. The rearview mirror showed the clearing receding, but also somehow getting closer. I don't know how long I drove. Time felt broken, stretching and compressing. The sun never rose. The road went on forever. But then, finally, I saw the ranger station ahead. Its single light burned like a beacon. I skidded to a stop in the parking lot, nearly hitting the building. The ranger looked up from his crossword puzzle, the same ranger from before, his expression unchanged. "Back already?" he asked mildly. "There's, in the forest, my husband." I couldn't form coherent sentences. He set down his pencil. "You went past mile marker 47, didn't you?" "Yes, but—" "I told you, most folks don't go that far." He stood, walking around the desk. In the harsh, fluorescent light, I saw that his movements were slightly off, his joints bending in ways that made my skin crawl. The ones that do, well, they usually come back different, if they come back at all. "What are you?" "Just doing my job, recording the names of those who enter, checking to see who comes out." He picked up a ledger, running his finger down a list of names. "Derek Morrison, entered September 24th. Hasn't left yet, according to my records. He's in there. Those things have him. Maybe, or maybe he's right here." The ranger's face rippled like water, and for a moment I saw Derek's face beneath it. Then it was the ranger again, smiling that too wide smile. "Maybe we're all in there, and we've been in there all along." I backed toward the door, my hand finding the handle. "You can leave," the ranger said. "Drive back to Seattle. Return to your life. But you'll always know what's waiting in the trees. And when you close your eyes, you'll see the carving. Your face in the bark, waiting to be claimed." I ran for the RV, my vision blurring with tears. The engine was still running. I floored it, racing down the mountain road as the sun finally began to rise, painting the sky in bruised purples and sickly yellows. That was 3 weeks ago. I'm back in Seattle now, in our apartment that feels too empty, too quiet. The police filed a missing person report for Derek. Search parties combed the forest but found nothing. No trace of him, no trace of our campsite, as if we'd never been there at all. I haven't told anyone the truth. How could I? They'd think I killed him, that I'm making up stories to cover my guilt. Maybe I am guilty. Maybe if I'd insisted we leave earlier, if I'd been a better wife, if I'd loved him more. But late at night, I hear Derek's voice in the other room. I hear him moving through the apartment, opening drawers, sitting in his chair. When I work up the courage to look, there's never anyone there. Yesterday, I found something in the mail, an envelope with no return address containing a single photograph. It showed a tree trunk, and carved into it was Derek's face. But in this carving, his eyes were open, his mouth stretched in a silent scream. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were 4 words: "Come back for him." I burned it. I burned it and flushed the ashes down the toilet and told myself it was a sick prank. But this morning, I woke up to find bark under my fingernails, splinters of wood embedded in my palms. And when I looked in the bathroom mirror, my face seemed different, flatter, harder, more like carved wood than flesh. I traced my fingers over my features, feeling for the familiar landmarks, my nose, my scar, my cheekbones. Everything was in the right place, but it felt wrong, like I was touching a mask instead of skin. I went to work, taught my classes at the community college, graded papers, had coffee with colleagues. Everyone acted normal. No one seemed to notice that I was different, that I was becoming something else. Or maybe they did notice. Maybe they saw exactly what I was becoming and chose not to say anything. Because in the windows, in the polished surfaces, in every reflection, I could see it clearly now. My face was losing its softness, its humanity. The angles were becoming too precise, too symmetrical. My eyes were darkening, the whites disappearing. I was turning into my carving. Tonight, I packed a bag. I put the RV keys in my pocket. I wrote a note to my sister telling her I love her, telling her not to look for me, because I can hear it now, even here in the city. The crying, the child's voice calling to me from the forest, from the trees, from the dark spaces between, and beneath it, Derek's voice, whispering my name. The forest has its hooks in me. It carved my face into its flesh, and now I'm bound to it. Every day I stay away, I become more wooden, more hollow, more like the things that wear stolen faces. I have two choices. I can stay here and slowly turn into a lifeless replica, a carved mask of who I used to be. Or I can go back, return to Gifford Pinchot, past mile marker 47, to the clearing where it all started. Maybe I'll find Derek. Maybe I'll free him. Maybe we'll both become something else together. Faces in the bark, echoes in the forest, warnings carved into ancient wood. Or maybe I'll just disappear, like all the others whose faces I saw on the trees. Another name in the ranger's ledger. Another cautionary tale whispered around campfires. It's dark now. The apartment is silent except for the sound of my breathing, which is growing slower, harder, like air moving through wood instead of lungs. I can feel the pull growing stronger, the forest calling me home. I pick up my keys. I walk to the door, and I know with absolute certainty that I will never return from where I'm going. Not as myself, not as Lucy, but as something else. Something that wears Lucy's face but speaks with the voice of the forest. The RV starts on the first try, like it's been waiting for me, like it knows where we're going. I drive north, toward the mountains, toward the darkness between the trees. The highway unfolds before me and I watch the mile markers count down. 52, 51, 50. When I reach 47, I don't stop. I keep driving, deeper, following the road that shouldn't exist but does, the road that only appears for those the forest has claimed. In my rearview mirror, my reflection smiles with too many teeth. And somewhere ahead, in the clearing surrounded by watching trees, two carvings wait side by side, Derek and Lucy Morrison, faces in the bark, forever. The forest takes care of its own. Story 2. I'm Wyatt. I'm 34 years old, and I came to the Ocala National Forest in Central Florida because my marriage was falling apart and I needed to think. The air at this godforsaken place reeked of sulfur from the moment I pulled my rented RV into the primitive campsite off Forest Road 573, near the Juniper Springs area. I told myself it was just the natural springs, the limestone deposits, maybe some decaying vegetation in the swampy sections. But even as I tried to rationalize it, something in my gut twisted with recognition. This was the smell of something fundamentally wrong. My wife, Caroline, hadn't come. She'd refused, actually, her voice cold over the phone when I'd called from the road. Go clear your head, Wyatt. Maybe figure out why you've been so absent. Absent. The word had stung because it was true. My advertising job had consumed me for 3 years. Late nights bleeding into weekends. My creative director role meaning I was always on call, always thinking about campaigns, always somewhere else even when I was home. This trip was supposed to be a reset. A week alone in nature to remember who I was before the career, before the apartment in Atlanta became a hotel I occasionally slept in. I'd brought my dog, at least. Diesel, a 7-year-old German Shepherd mix I'd adopted when he was a puppy, sat in the passenger seat of the RV, his ears alert as we'd driven deeper into the forest. He'd been whining since we crossed into the national forest boundaries, a low, continuous sound that wasn't like him. Diesel was trained, steady, the kind of dog who'd sleep through thunderstorms. But here, he was anxious, his eyes darting to the windows, his body tense. The campsite was isolated, which was what I'd wanted. No hookups, no other campers visible through the dense palmetto scrub and longleaf pines, just a cleared area barely large enough for the 23-foot RV, a fire ring made of blackened stones, and a weathered picnic table that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The forest pressed in on all sides, the understory thick with saw palmetto and wiregrass, the canopy overhead filtering the late afternoon sunlight into something greenish and dim. I parked, leveled the RV, and stepped outside. The sulfur smell hit me immediately, so strong my eyes watered. The ground beneath my feet felt wrong too, spongy, almost warm, like I was standing on something alive. Steam rose from fissures in the earth about 20 yards from the campsite, thin wisps that caught the light and glowed faintly yellow. Jesus, I muttered, walking toward the steam. Diesel barked once, sharp and urgent, and I turned to see him standing at the RV door, refusing to follow. "It's okay, boy, just thermal springs or something." But it wasn't thermal springs. As I got closer, I could see the fissures weren't natural. They were too straight, too deliberate, arranged in patterns that suggested intention. Symbols, maybe, though I couldn't decipher them. And the steam carried that sulfur reek so intensely I could taste it. A bitter, metallic tang that coated my tongue and made my throat burn. I backed away slowly, my pulse quickening for reasons I couldn't articulate. This was just geology, I told myself. Florida had sinkholes, sulfur deposits from the aquifer, all kinds of natural explanations. But my hands were shaking as I returned to the RV, and Diesel pressed against my leg, trembling. That first night, I tried to act normal. I set up the portable grill, cooked a simple dinner of hot dogs and beans, sat at the picnic table while dusk settled over the forest. The sulfur smell faded slightly as the sun went down, replaced by the usual night sounds of insects and distant birds. I fed Diesel, watched him eat reluctantly, his attention constantly drawn to the tree line. I'd brought a bottle of bourbon and poured myself a generous glass, hoping it would calm my nerves. The isolation felt different here than I'd expected. Not peaceful, but oppressive, like the forest was holding its breath. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch made me flinch. Diesel sat at my feet, his body rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "It's just animals," I told him, scratching behind his ears. "Deer, maybe raccoons." But I didn't believe it. The forest had gone too quiet, the insect chorus dying away until there was nothing but silence and that barely audible sound. A hissing, like gas escaping under pressure. It was coming from the fissures, I realized, and it was getting louder. By the time I went inside the RV, locking the door behind me, the hissing had become a low roar, punctuated by sharp cracks that sounded like bones breaking. Diesel paced the narrow aisle between the bed and the kitchenette, panting, his eyes wide. I sat on the bed, pulled out my phone, and wasn't surprised to find no signal. I'd expected that. The campsite was remote, the nearest cell tower probably 20 miles away. I tried to read, couldn't focus, and eventually lay down with the lights on. Diesel curled against my side. Sleep came in fragments, broken by dreams of Caroline standing at the edge of the campsite calling my name. But when I ran toward her in the dream, she'd dissolve into steam, and I'd wake to find Diesel growling at the window, his hackles raised. The second day started wrong. I woke to find the RV rocking slightly, as if something was pushing against it. Diesel was at the door, barking frantically, and when I looked out the window, I saw nothing, just the empty campsite, the forest beyond, and that steam still rising from the fissures, thicker now, almost a fog. I opened the door cautiously, and the sulfur smell nearly knocked me back. It was worse than yesterday, concentrated, like standing over an active volcano. The ground was definitely warmer now, almost hot beneath my bare feet, and the fissures had widened, spreading in spiderweb patterns that radiated from a central point about 50 feet into the woods. "Okay, this is not normal," I said aloud, needing to hear my own voice. Diesel whined, pressing against my legs, and I scooped up his leash. "Come on, boy. Let's get out of here." But when I walked to the RV, intending to pack up and leave, I found the engine dead. Not dead, completely unresponsive. The key wouldn't even turn in the ignition, and when I checked under the hood, everything looked fine but felt wrong. The metal was too hot, the wiring discolored, and there was that smell again. So strong I gagged. I tried my phone again. Still no signal, but something stranger. The screen kept glitching, showing static, then images I didn't recognize. Faces, twisted and screaming, there for a fraction of a second before disappearing. I turned it off, my hands shaking, and shoved it in my pocket. "We'll walk out," I told Diesel, trying to sound confident. "It's only 5 miles to the main road." But when I started down the dirt track we'd driven in on, I found it had changed. The road was still there, but it curved differently, bent back on itself in ways that didn't match my memory. And after 20 minutes of walking, I found myself back at the campsite, approaching from a different direction. I tried again, marking trees with my knife as I went. Same result. 30 minutes of walking, and I was back at the RV, the marked trees nowhere to be seen. Diesel was pulling hard on the leash now, trying to drag me toward the woods, away from the campsite. I followed him, thinking maybe he knew something I didn't, and we pushed through palmetto fronds and wiregrass until we came to a clearing I hadn't seen before. In the center of the clearing was a well. Not an old well, not a natural sinkhole. A constructed well, stone-lined with a heavy wooden cover pulled aside, and rising from it was that steam, that sulfur-reeking fog pouring out in thick columns that spread across the clearing and into the surrounding forest. Diesel stopped at the edge of the clearing, his entire body trembling, and refused to go further. I approached the well alone, my curiosity overriding my fear, and looked down into it. Darkness. Complete and absolute, the kind that seemed to swallow light. But I could hear something down there. Movement, scraping, and beneath it, voices. Many voices, whispering in a language I didn't understand but that made my skin crawl and my vision blur. I backed away fast, stumbling over roots, and ran back to the RV with Diesel at my heels. My mind was racing, trying to find explanations. Some kind of natural gas pocket, maybe combined with acoustic anomalies in the limestone. The voices were just wind, the darkness just the depth of the well. But I didn't believe any of it. That afternoon, things deteriorated quickly. The steam from the fissures spread until it covered the campsite in a yellowish fog that burned my lungs and made my eyes water. I retreated into the RV, sealing the door and windows as best I could, but the smell seeped in anyway, pervasive and choking. Diesel was inconsolable now, barking at nothing, spinning in circles, his eyes rolling. I held him, trying to calm him, but my own panic was rising. The RV felt smaller by the hour, the walls pressing in, and outside the windows I could see shapes moving in the fog. Tall, wrong shapes that walked on too many legs and bent at angles that defied anatomy. I told myself they were shadows, tricks of the light. But when one pressed against the window, leaving a handprint of something that wasn't a hand, too many fingers, too long, with joints in the wrong places, I stopped trying to rationalize. Night fell, and the fog glowed. Not reflected light, but its own luminescence, a sickly yellow-green that pulsed like breathing. The hissing from the fissures became voices, clear now, calling my name. Wyatt, Wyatt, come down, come see. I covered my ears, but the voices were inside my head too, whispering promises. See Caroline. Fix everything. Just come down. Diesel attacked the door, trying to break through, and I grabbed him, wrestled him to the floor. His eyes were wild, foam at his mouth, and for a terrible moment I thought he was going to bite me. But then he collapsed, panting, and buried his head against my chest. We stayed like that for hours, huddled on the floor, while outside the RV those shapes circled and the fog pressed against the windows and the voices called and called and called. The third day, I woke to silence. Complete silence. No birds, no insects, no wind, nothing. Just the smell, stronger than ever, and a heat that made the inside of the RV feel like an oven. Diesel was barely moving, his breathing shallow, his eyes glazed. I gave him water, forced him to drink, but he wouldn't eat. Neither would I. The thought of food made me nauseous, and besides, everything in the RV had spoiled overnight. The bread was covered in black mold, the fruit rotted, the meat in the cooler liquefied into something that stank worse than the sulfur. I went outside because I couldn't stand being in the RV anymore. The fog had thinned slightly, and I could see the campsite, changed. The fire ring was gone, replaced by a perfect circle of scorched earth. The picnic table had collapsed into ash, and the fissures had spread, crisscrossing the entire clearing, glowing faintly red from within. The ground steamed with brimstone. I stood in the center of it, feeling the heat through my shoes, and laughed because the absurdity was too much. This was hell, literally hell, opening beneath a state park campsite in Central Florida. But then I saw her, Caroline, standing at the edge of the clearing, exactly as she'd looked in my dreams. She was wearing the blue dress she'd worn on our first date. her hair down the way I loved, and she was smiling. "Wyatt," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the distance. "I've been looking for you." I took a step toward her, then stopped. Something was wrong. Her shadow was pointing the wrong direction, away from the sun. And her eyes were black, completely black. No whites, no iris, just darkness. "You're not real," I said, my voice cracking. "Real enough," she replied, and her smile widened, too wide, splitting her face. "Come with me. It's so much better down below." I turned and ran back to the RV, slamming the door. Diesel was on his feet, barking at the window, and when I looked out, I saw Caroline, or the thing that looked like Caroline, walking toward us. Not walking, gliding, her feet not touching the ground, her body elongating with each movement until she was impossibly tall, her limbs too thin, her head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. She reached the RV and pressed her face against the window, her mouth opening to reveal rows of teeth, sharp and yellowed. "Let me in, Wyatt. We have so much to discuss." I closed the curtains, backed away, and tried to think. The RV wouldn't start. The road looped back on itself. My phone was useless. And now something was wearing my wife's face and asking to be let in. There had to be a way out. Some logic to this. Some escape route my panicking brain just wasn't seeing. Then I remembered the well, the source of the steam, the voices, the fog. Maybe if I could cover it, seal it somehow, this would stop. It was a stupid idea, born of desperation, but I didn't have anything else. I gathered what I could, a shovel from the RV's storage, a tarp, some rope, and waited until the Caroline thing drifted away, back into the fog. Diesel tried to follow me when I left, but I locked him inside. If this went wrong, at least he'd be safe for a while longer. The thought didn't comfort me. The walk to the clearing took forever. The fog thick enough now that I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The ground was hot, nearly unbearable, and I could feel blisters forming on my feet through my shoes. The steam was so thick I could barely breathe, and the voices were constant now, overlapping, screaming, begging, laughing. When I reached the well, I found I wasn't alone. There were others there standing around the opening, motionless. They looked human at first glance, men, women, children, all dressed in clothes from different eras. But as I got closer, I saw the wrongness. Their skin was gray, ash-like, crumbling at the edges. Their eyes were empty sockets that nonetheless watched me, and they were steaming, sulfur pouring from their mouths and noses like they were chimneys. "You're too late," one of them said, a woman in a pioneer dress. "The door's been open for days. More come through every hour." "What door?" I asked, though I already knew. She gestured to the well. "Down, where it's always been, where it's always waiting." I pushed past them, ignoring their reaching hands, and looked down into the well again. The darkness wasn't complete anymore. Deep, impossibly deep, I could see light, red and flickering, like distant fires. And climbing up, slowly but steadily, were shapes. Hundreds of shapes, thousands maybe, pulling themselves up the walls of the well with claws and hooks and appendages I couldn't name. I dropped the shovel, stumbled back. The tarp and rope fell from my hands. This wasn't something I could seal or cover. This was something fundamental, geological. A crack in reality that went all the way down to whatever hell actually was. "Why here?" I asked the woman. "Why this place?" She smiled, her teeth falling out as she did. "Thin places. Always been thin places. The Seminoles knew. Called it the breathing ground. Said if you listen, you can hear the earth exhale the damned. I ran then, no plan, just a pure animal panic, crashing through the fog and the palmetto and the heat. Behind me, I heard the well shudder and crack, and the ground itself seemed to split open, the sound like the world breaking in half. I made it back to the RV, threw open the door, grabbed Diesel, and ran in the opposite direction from the well, from the clearing, from whatever was climbing out of that pit. Diesel was barking, half mad, but he ran with me, and we plunged into the forest with no thought except escape. The fog was everywhere now, and the ground was splitting open in more places, steam pouring out, and with it, things that had no business existing. I saw them in glimpses, figures that were human-shaped but made of smoke and bone, creatures that walked on all fours but had human faces, children with too many eyes who laughed as they reached for me. We ran until I couldn't run anymore, my lungs burning, my legs giving out. We collapsed in a small hollow, hidden by thick vegetation, and I held Diesel close, trying to quiet his barking, trying to quiet my own gasping breaths. The fog flowed around us, searching, and I heard voices calling my name. Not just Caroline's voice now, but my mother's, my father's, friends who'd died, people I'd known and lost. All of them begging me to come out, to join them, to stop running. "It's better down there," Caroline's voice said, very close. "No more guilt, no more shame, no more absence. Just us, together, forever." I pressed my face against Diesel's fur and tried not to listen, tried not to think about how appealing that sounded actually. The idea of giving up, of letting go, of walking into the fog and never having to try anymore. But Diesel licked my face, his rough tongue warm and real, and it pulled me back. No, not like this. Not here. We stayed hidden until dawn, or what I thought was dawn. The fog glowed brighter, the sulfur smell lessened slightly, and the voices faded to whispers. When I finally stood, my legs barely supporting me, I could see that the forest had changed again. The trees were dead, blackened and skeletal, and the ground was covered in ash. The fissures had spread everywhere, a network of glowing cracks that made the earth look like a shattered mirror. But in the distance, through the haze, I could see something else. A road, a real road, paved and maintained with a vehicle on it. A ranger truck, if I was seeing right. I stumbled toward it, Diesel at my side, falling and getting up and falling again. The ash burned my hands, and the heat was unbearable. But I kept moving because the alternative was to stop, and stopping meant dying or worse. The Caroline thing appeared one more time, blocking my path, her face shifting between my wife and something reptilian, her voice sweet and poisonous. "Stay. Be with me. I'm lonely, Wyatt. So lonely down there." "You're not Caroline," I said, surprised at the firmness in my voice. "You're not anything. Just smoke and lies." She screamed then, a sound that shattered the dead trees and made the ground shake, and launched herself at me. I felt her hands, cold, burning, both at once, close around my throat, and I went down hard, Diesel snarling and biting at her, tearing chunks of smoke and ash from her form. I grabbed a rock, sharp-edged limestone, and swung it at her face. It passed through her, disrupting her form, and she dissolved into fog, but not before she whispered in my ear, "You'll be back. They always come back." The ranger truck was closer now, and I could hear voices, real voices, human voices, calling out. I stumbled the last 100 yards and collapsed on the asphalt, Diesel barking frantically, and felt hands on me, lifting me, carrying me. "Jesus Christ," someone said. "Where the hell did you come from?" "The campsite," I managed. "Off Forest Road 573. There's something. Forest Road 573 has been closed for 2 months, a woman's voice said. "Environmental hazard, sulfur emissions from the aquifer." "I was just there," I insisted. 3 days. My RV? "Sir, you're severely dehydrated and suffering from sulfur poisoning. We need to get you to a hospital." They put me in the truck, Diesel beside me, and drove. I watched out the window as we passed the turnoff to Forest Road 573, and I saw the barriers, the warning signs, the chain-link fence with hazard tape. And behind it, through the trees, I saw the fog, glowing yellow-green, and shapes moving within it. The rangers saw me looking. Been like that since June. Ground opened up, started venting gas. EPA's investigating, but there's talk of sinkholes, maybe even volcanic activity, though that's crazy for Florida. We've had to evacuate the whole area. "Volcanic?" I repeated numbly. "Or something," she said. "Weird stuff happens in thin places, you know. The Seminoles had legends about this area. Said the earth was breathing. Guess they knew something we didn't. At the hospital, they treated me for second-degree burns on my feet. severe dehydration, sulfur poisoning, and what they called acute stress reaction. They wanted to keep me for observation, but I checked myself out after 2 days, unable to stand the confinement, the nightmares that came whenever I closed my eyes. Caroline came to see me once, the real Caroline, not the thing that wore her face. She sat by my bed, her expression unreadable, and listened as I tried to explain what had happened. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The doctors think you had a breakdown," she finally said. "Stress, isolation, maybe some kind of hallucinogenic reaction to the gas. You don't believe me." "I believe you experienced something," she said carefully. "But Wyatt, you're talking about hell. Literal hell, opening up in a state park." I didn't argue. How could I? I barely believed it myself anymore, despite the scars on my feet, despite the sulfur smell that lingered in my hair and clothes no matter how many times I showered. She left after an hour, promising to think about things, about us. But I knew I'd never see her again. Not really. The part of me that had been her husband had stayed in that forest, swallowed by the fog and the heat and the voices that promised peace. I went back once, 3 weeks later, after I'd been released and had nowhere else to be. The barriers were still up, but I climbed the fence at night and walked the overgrown path to where the campsite should have been. It was gone. Not just the RV, that I'd expected, but everything. The clearing, the fire ring, even the well, just forest, thick and undisturbed, as if no one had ever been there. But the ground was warm beneath my feet, and when I pressed my ear to the earth, I could hear it. Faint, but unmistakable. Hissing. Voices. The sound of something vast and patient, waiting just below the surface. I left Florida after that, drove north until I ran out of money, and ended up in a small town in Georgia where no one knew me. I got a job washing dishes, rented a room above a bar, and tried to rebuild something resembling a life. Diesel is with me, older now, quieter, but still alert in ways that remind me he remembers. Sometimes at night he'll growl at nothing, and I'll smell that faint sulfur scent, and I'll know that the thing wearing Caroline's face was right. They always come back. I don't sleep well anymore. When I do, I dream of that well, of the shapes climbing up from below, and I wake up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat that reeks of brimstone. The doctors gave me pills, but they don't help. Nothing helps except keeping busy, staying in motion, never letting my mind settle long enough to remember the voices, the promises, the terrible appeal of just giving up and walking into the fog. I look at maps sometimes, late at night when the bar below is closed and the street is empty. I trace my finger along the Ocala National Forest, along Forest Road 573, and I wonder how many others have found themselves there, drawn by isolation or desperation or just bad luck. I wonder how many heard the voices and listened. And I wonder, in my darkest moments, if I actually escaped at all, or if I'm still there, still running through that burning forest, and this life, this room, this job, this slow decay, is just another layer of the hell that's been waiting for me all along. The ground steams with brimstone. Even here, even now, I can smell it. And sometimes, late at night, I hear Caroline calling my name, asking me to come back, to stop running, to join her where it's so much better, so much easier, so much more honest than this pretend life I'm living in a town that doesn't exist, among people who look through me like I'm already gone. Diesel whines. I hold him close, and I wait for dawn, knowing it will come, but wondering, always wondering, if when I walk outside tomorrow the ground will be cracked and steaming, and the voices will finally stop being promises and start being commands. They say hell is other people, but I know the truth now. Hell is geology. Hell is chemistry. Hell is the earth itself, breathing out the damned, one sulfur-soaked breath at a time. And once you've smelled it, once you've heard it call your name, you never really leave. You just keep running, knowing that eventually the ground beneath your feet will warm, and the voices will find you again, and the thin places will open, and you'll have to choose. Keep fighting, or finally, mercifully, let go. I'm still choosing to fight. But every day it gets harder. Every day the sulfur smell gets stronger. Every day Caroline's voice gets clearer, more insistent, more real. And every day, I wonder if today is the day I stop running and finally,
Story 3.
inevitably,
I'm Paisley,
go down. 29. The grass at Gifford-Pinchot National Forest curled into letters. That's what I told myself later when they asked me to explain. When the psychiatrist leaned forward with her pen poised and her voice soft as gauze, asking me to start from the beginning. But there is no beginning to this. Not really. Some things don't start. They've always been waiting, patient as stones, for you to finally arrive. We pulled into Gifford-Pinchot on a Thursday in late September, the kind of afternoon where the light comes through the trees at an angle that makes everything look like it's underwater. My girlfriend Rachel was driving, one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine across the center console of our rented RV. We'd been planning this trip for months, ever since her promotion came through and my graphic design contract finally paid out. 2 weeks in Washington State, just us and the trees and the kind of silence you can't find in Seattle. "This is perfect," Rachel said as we turned onto the forest road. "Look at this place, Paige. It's like something out of a fairy tale." She wasn't wrong. Gifford-Pinchot stretched out around us in every direction, dense with Douglas firs and western hemlocks, the understory thick with sword ferns and Oregon grape. The road was barely more than 2 dirt tracks with grass growing between them, winding deeper into the forest with each turn. The GPS had lost a signal about 20 minutes back, but Rachel had printed maps. She was always prepared like that, always thinking 3 steps ahead. We found our spot just before sunset. A small clearing near Taklak Lake, far enough from the main campgrounds that we'd have privacy but close enough to the water that we could hear it lapping against the shore. Rachel backed the RV into position while I got out to guide her. The forest floor soft and spongy under my hiking boots. The air smelled like pine sap and decomposing leaves and something else, something mineral and cold that I couldn't quite place. "Home sweet home," Rachel announced, killing the engine. She stepped out and stretched, her red hair catching the last rays of sunlight. "God, it's beautiful here, and so quiet." She was right about that, too. The silence was enormous, pressing in from all sides. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the brush. Just the whisper of wind through the treetops and that steady, rhythmic lapping of water against stone. We spent the first hour setting up camp, unfolding lawn chairs and stringing up battery-powered lights around our little clearing. Rachel got the portable grill going while I made a salad, and we ate dinner watching the stars come out. More stars than I'd ever seen in my life, scattered across the sky like someone had thrown handfuls of diamonds against black velvet. "No cell service," Rachel said, checking her phone. "Total digital detox. This is exactly what we needed." I agreed with her. I'd been looking forward to this for weeks. 2 weeks away from deadlines and client emails and the constant buzz of notifications. 2 weeks of just existing, of being present in my own life instead of always thinking 3 projects ahead. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. The RV bed was surprisingly comfortable, and Rachel's warmth beside me was reassuring, familiar. I dreamed of nothing, just blessed, empty darkness, and woke to morning light filtering through the curtains and the smell of coffee brewing. "Morning, sleepyhead," Rachel said, already dressed in her hiking gear. "I'm making pancakes. We've got that trail around the lake today, remember? 8 miles, easy terrain." The hike was perfect. The trail wound through old-growth forest, past massive tree trunks wrapped in moss, over wooden bridges spanning clear streams. We saw no one else the entire time, just us and the trees and the occasional chipmunk darting across the path. Rachel took photos with her nice camera, the one she'd saved up for, capturing the way light filtered through the canopy and turned everything green gold. It was when we stopped for lunch on a rocky outcropping overlooking the lake that I first noticed something odd. Rachel was unpacking our sandwiches, and I was standing near the edge, looking out at the water, when I glanced down and saw writing in the grass. Not carved or spray-painted or left with sticks, the grass itself had grown in patterns, short blades and tall ones forming clear, distinct letters. I blinked, certain I was seeing things wrong, that it was just a trick of the light or pareidolia, my brain finding patterns where none existed. But when I crouched down and really looked, there was no mistaking it. The letters spelled "turn back." "Rach," I called, my voice coming out higher than I intended. "Come look at this." She joined me, sandwich in hand, and followed my pointing finger. For a moment, she just stared. Then she laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's weird," she said. "Must be some kind of fungus or something. Like those fairy rings, you know? Where mushrooms grow in circles. Grass doesn't grow like that from fungus," I said. "And look at the letters. They're too perfect." Rachel shrugged, but I saw her take a photo with her phone before the lack of signal reminded us both that there was no one to send it to. "Probably just some kids messing around. Come on, let's eat. I'm starving." We finished lunch in silence, and when we packed up to continue the hike, I noticed Rachel looking over her shoulder more than usual. Neither of us mentioned the grass again, but it sat between us like a stone in still water, sending out ripples we both pretended not to see. That night, Rachel wanted to have a campfire. We'd brought a bundle of firewood from the ranger station, and she arranged it carefully in the established fire ring, adding kindling and crumpled newspaper. But when she lit the match and held it to the paper, nothing happened. The flame touched the edges of the newsprint and then just went out. Not like a gust of wind had extinguished it, but like it had simply decided to stop burning. "That's strange," Rachel muttered, striking another match. Same result, then another, and another. "Maybe the wood's damp," I suggested, though it had been dry when we loaded it into the RV. "It's not damp." Rachel's voice had an edge to it I didn't like. "The match light's fine, see? But the second it touches anything else, it just dies." She was right. The matches burned normally in her hand, but the moment the flame made contact with paper or wood, it extinguished as if dunked in water. We tried lighter fluid. We tried dry leaves. Nothing worked. The fire refused to catch, refused to exist. "Forget it," Rachel finally said, throwing the matches aside. "We don't need a fire. It's not that cold." But it was. As soon as the sun had set fully, the temperature had dropped fast, and now I could see my breath misting in front of my face. We retreated into the RV, turning on the propane heater and huddling under blankets. Rachel tried to make light of it, suggesting we tell ghost stories, but neither of us could muster much enthusiasm. The failed fire had unsettled her more than she wanted to admit, and the grass kept coming back to my mind like a splinter I couldn't work free. I woke sometime deep in the night to the sound of movement outside the RV. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling our vehicle, round and round, never stopping, never speeding up or slowing down. Just that steady, patient trudge through the grass and pine needles. "Rachel," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Rachel, wake up. Someone's out there." She came awake instantly, her hand finding mine in the darkness. We lay there frozen, listening. The footsteps continued their circuit, and now I could hear something else. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, like whatever was out there had been walking for a very long time. "Should we call for help?" Rachel whispered. "No signal, remember. The ranger station is 20 miles back down the road. Rachel, I don't think we should go out there." The footsteps stopped, right outside our door. We could hear the breathing clearly now, wet and ragged, and then a scratching sound. Long, slow, drags, like fingernails on metal. It moved from the door down the side of the RV, an awful scraping that set my teeth on edge and made my skin crawl. We didn't sleep the rest of that night. We lay there in the dark, clutching each other, while whatever was outside made its slow circuit 3 more times before finally, mercifully, leaving. When dawn finally came, gray and cold, we burst out of the RV like prisoners freed from a cell. "Look," Rachel said, her voice shaking. She was pointing at the ground. The grass all around our RV had grown in patterns. Words, dozens of them, written in living green. "Leave, go home. Not safe too late." "She's watching. She's hungry. Run." "Okay," I said, my voice surprisingly steady considering how badly my hands were shaking. "Okay, we're leaving. Right now. We'll pack up and—" "Paisley." Rachel was staring at something beyond me, her face white as paper. "Paisley, Look at the RV. I turned. The scratches from last night were visible in the morning light, long gouges in the metal siding, deep enough that I could see bare aluminum underneath. But that wasn't what made my blood turn to ice. The scratches formed letters, carved with brutal efficiency. Mine. We threw everything into the RV in a blind panic, not bothering to fold or organize, just shoving camping gear and clothes and food into whatever space we could find. Rachel was in the driver's seat, key in the ignition, when she let out a sound I'd never heard her make before. A whimper, small and afraid. "What?" I demanded. "What is it?" "The engine won't start." "What do you mean it won't start?" "Try again." She did. The RV made a clicking sound, then nothing. Not a sputter, not a cough. Just silence. "It was fine yesterday," Rachel said, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "It was fine, Pace. It was completely fine. Pop the hood. Maybe it's just a loose battery cable or something." We got out and I lifted the hood, though I knew almost nothing about engines. What I saw made no sense. Every wire, every hose, every connection had been severed. Cut clean through, as if with scissors or a very sharp knife. The engine was intact but utterly disabled, a useless collection of metal and plastic. "We need to walk," I said. "Back to the ranger station. We need to go now." Rachel nodded, mute with fear. We each grabbed our backpacks, mine with water and some snacks, hers with the first aid kit and her camera, and started walking down the dirt road we'd driven in on. The forest felt different in daylight, somehow more oppressive. The trees leaned in overhead, blocking out most of the sky, and the undergrowth pressed close on either side. Our footsteps seemed too loud, echoing off the trunks in weird, distorted ways. And everywhere, the grass spelled out messages. "Wrong way, she sees you bleeding soon. Mine, mine, mine." "Don't look," Rachel said, her hand tight in mine. "Just keep walking. Don't look at it." But how could we not look? The words were everywhere, growing more frantic, more urgent. The grass formed letters 3 feet high, impossible to ignore. And as we walked, I started to notice other things. Trees with bark that had peeled away in strips, revealing what looked like raw, red flesh underneath. Rocks that pulsed like hearts. The path itself seemed to be breathing, rising and falling with each step we took. "This isn't real," I heard myself saying. "This can't be real. We're having some kind of shared hallucination, maybe carbon monoxide poisoning or Paisley." Rachel had stopped walking. She was staring at something ahead on the trail. "Paisley, that's us." I looked. 2 figures stood in the path about 50 yards ahead, their backs to us. One had red hair like Rachel. One had dark hair like mine. They wore the same clothes we were wearing. They stood perfectly still, not moving, not breathing. "No," I said. "No, that's not. We're right here. That can't be us." "Then who is it?" As if in answer, the figures turned around. They looked exactly like us, feature for feature, down to the mole on Rachel's left cheek and the scar on my chin from a childhood bike accident. But their eyes were wrong, black from corner to corner, reflecting nothing, and they smiled, both of them, smiles too wide for human faces. Rachel screamed and pulled me off the path, crashing through the undergrowth. Branches whipped at our faces and thorns tore at our clothes, but we didn't stop. Behind us, I could hear the things that wore our faces giving chase, their footsteps never faltering, never hurrying. They didn't need to hurry. They knew we couldn't run forever. We burst into another clearing, smaller than ours had been, and stopped short. In the center of the clearing stood a woman. She was impossibly tall, 7 feet at least, thin as a mantis and just as alien. Her skin was the gray-white of birch bark, cracked and peeling in places. Her hair hung to her waist in tangled ropes, woven through with moss and small bones. She wore what might have once been a dress, now little more than rags held together with roots and spider silk, but it was her face that froze us in place. Beautiful and terrible, ageless and ancient with eyes like holes burned in paper. The grass at her feet spelled out a single word, repeated over and over in tighter and tighter spirals. Hungry, 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 hungry. "Oh, God," Rachel breathed beside me. "Oh, God, oh, God, oh." The woman moved toward us, not walking so much as flowing, like water or smoke. When she opened her mouth, I saw that it was full of teeth, rows and rows of them, more teeth than any mouth should hold. She spoke, and her voice was the sound of wind through dead trees, of ice cracking on a frozen lake, of things that should stay buried breaking through the earth. "Mine," she said, "my forest, my rules, my food. We'll leave," I heard myself say, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "We'll leave right now. We'll never come back. Please, just let us go." She laughed, and the sound made the trees around us groan and sway. "Too late for leaving. You read my words. You heard my call. You belong here now. You belong to me." Rachel suddenly broke away from me, pulling her camera from her bag. She raised it and snapped a photo, the flash going off like a gunshot in the dim forest. The woman recoiled, shrieking, her form flickering like a bad television signal. For just a moment, I saw what she really was underneath the woman shape, something vast and hungry, older than the trees, with too many limbs and mouths that opened in impossible places. "Run!" Rachel screamed, grabbing my hand and yanking me back into the woods. We ran blindly, crashing through the forest with no idea where we were going. Behind us, that awful shrieking continued, joined now by other voices, the things that wore our faces, and others, dozens of others, all crying out in rage and hunger. The grass beneath our feet spelled out curses and threats, the letters tripping us, tangling our ankles. I don't know how long we ran. Time felt wrong, stretching and compressing in ways that made no sense. The sun never seemed to move in the sky, stuck at the same angle, casting the same shadows. We passed the same fallen log 3 times, 4 times, the same boulder, the same twisted tree. "We're going in circles," Rachel gasped, bent double and heaving for breath. "She's keeping us here. She won't let us leave." "The lake," I said, an idea forming through my panic. "Water. If we can get to the lake." Why would that help? I don't know, but every story about things like this says they can't cross running water, right? Maybe. That's just stories, Pace. Do you have a better idea? She didn't. We oriented ourselves by the sound of water and started moving again, more carefully now, trying to conserve our energy. The grass continued to spell out messages, but they were different now. Close, almost nearly there, so hungry, taste you soon. The trees had faces. I tried not to look at them directly, but I could see them in my peripheral vision. Eyes in the bark, mouths in the knots, watching us, whispering. Some of them were human faces, twisted in permanent expressions of terror or pain. Others were animal. Others were things that had never been alive in any world I understood. We reached the lake just as the sun finally began to set. The water was black and still as a mirror, reflecting nothing. At the edge, words in the grass spelled out, "Too late." "Now what?" Rachel asked. She was shaking, whether from fear or exhaustion I couldn't tell, probably both. Before I could answer, I heard it. Footsteps behind us. Many footsteps. I turned and saw them emerging from the trees. Dozens of figures, all wearing familiar faces. I saw myself repeated 20 times over. I saw Rachel, and my mother, and my dead grandfather, and my high school best friend, and people I'd passed on the street and forgotten. An army of stolen faces, all with those same black, empty eyes. And behind them, towering over them all, the woman. She smiled, and this close I could see that her teeth were made of splintered wood and broken bone. "Nowhere left to run," she said. "Nowhere left to hide. This forest is mine. You are mine." Rachel's hand found mine, squeezed tight. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." The woman reached for us, her fingers elongating into branches, roots, things with joints that bent the wrong way. The stolen face thing surged forward. Rachel pulled me toward the water, and we jumped. The cold was shocking, driving the air from my lungs. We went under, and kept going down much farther than the lake should have been deep. My lungs burned. I needed to breathe. We broke the surface, gasping and choking. But we weren't in the lake anymore. We were in a parking lot. A ranger station parking lot, specifically. The building stood 50 feet away, lights on in the windows, a bored-looking ranger visible through the glass door. My car, not the RV, my actual car, sat 3 spaces over, exactly where I'd left it when we'd stopped to get our camping permit 2 days ago. 2 days ago. Rachel and I lay on the pavement, soaking wet and shaking, staring at each other. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she reached up and touched her hair that should have been red but was now shot through with white, great streaks of it like she'd aged 20 years in 2 days. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, miraculously still there despite everything. It was dead, no surprise, but when I looked at my hands I saw dirt caked under my fingernails, ground in so deep it looked like it might never come out. And there, on my palm, a word written in what looked like scar tissue, raised and pink and permanent. Mine, Rachel, had one too. We compared them silently. These marks we'd carry forever. Proof that what had happened was real, even though every rational part of my brain screamed that it couldn't be. The ranger saw us eventually, came rushing out asking if we needed help, if we'd had an accident. Rachel told him we'd gone swimming and lost track of time, a lie that made no sense but which he seemed to accept. He offered us blankets and coffee and the use of a phone to call someone to pick us up. We declined. We just wanted to leave. My car started on the first try. We drove away from Gifford Pinchot National Forest as fast as I dared on the winding roads, neither of us speaking. The radio wouldn't work, just static on every station. In the rearview mirror, I could see the forest receding behind us, dark and dense and patient. We'd gone almost 30 miles when Rachel finally spoke. "Our RV," she said quietly. "It's still there. Our stuff. Everything. I'm not going back for it," I said, my voice hard. "Ever. Let the rental company come get it. Or not. I don't care. The photos on my camera. Rachel, please, please don't." She went quiet again. But after another mile, she said, "You saw it too, right? I'm not crazy. You saw all of it?" "I saw it. What was she?" "I don't know. And I didn't. Not a bear, not a person, not a hallucination. Something older than words, something that had claimed that forest long before we'd thought to name it or put it on a map. Something that was still there, still hungry, still waiting for the next people foolish enough to camp in its territory. We drove through the night, only stopping for gas and bathroom breaks, desperate to put as much distance between ourselves and that place as possible. When we finally made it back to Seattle, the sun was rising, and I felt something inside me unclench slightly. Civilization, safety, things that made sense. But that night, safe in our own bed with the door locked and all the lights on, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, that tall, impossible woman with her mouthful of teeth. I heard her voice, "You belong to me," and I knew, with a certainty that lived in my bones, that she'd meant it. The grass outside our apartment building started growing in patterns the next week. Just small ones at first, easy to miss. My name in the strip of lawn by the parking lot. Rachel's spelled out in the courtyard. We had the landlord mow it all down, but it grew back overnight. The letters taller and bolder. Mine still mine, always mine. Rachel started having seizures. The doctors couldn't explain them. Her brain scans were normal, her blood work fine. But once or twice a day she'd go rigid and shake and her eyes would roll back, and when she came to she'd be crying and saying she'd been back there, back in the forest, and the woman was waiting for her. I started finding bones. In my car, in my desk at work, in my pockets. Small ones at first, bird bones, mouse skulls, but they got bigger. Deer femurs, something that might have been a human rib. I'd throw them away, and more would appear. The mark on my palm started to spread. Slowly, so slowly I could almost convince myself I was imagining it. The raised tissue crept up my wrist, toward my heart. We tried to research it, to find out what we'd encountered. We found stories, of course, Pacific Northwest tribes spoke of forest spirits that claimed territories and demanded offerings. European settlers had their own tales of women in the woods, hags and witches who lured travelers to their deaths. But nothing quite matched. Nothing explained how we'd escaped or why she was still reaching for us across the miles. Rachel's hair continued to whiten. The seizures got worse. She stopped going to work, then stopped leaving the apartment. She'd sit at the window for hours, staring out at nothing, and sometimes I'd catch her whispering to herself, "She's calling. She wants me to come back. She's so hungry." 3 months after our camping trip, I woke up in the middle of the night to find Rachel's side of the bed empty. I searched the apartment frantically, already knowing what I'd find, or rather, what I wouldn't find. She'd left a note on the kitchen table. Just 2 words, "I'm sorry." Her car was missing from the parking lot. I called the police, but what could I tell them? That my girlfriend had been claimed by a forest spirit and had finally answered its call. They filed a missing persons report and promised to do everything they could. I knew they wouldn't find her. Not unless they wanted to be found, too. That was 2 weeks ago. The mark on my palm has reached my elbow now. The grass everywhere I go spells out the same message. Come home. Come back. Mine. I know what's going to happen. I can feel it like a rope around my chest, pulling tighter with each day. The woman in the forest is patient, but she won't wait forever. She'll keep pulling, keep calling, until I have no choice but to answer. Sometimes, late at night, I dream I'm back in that clearing. Rachel is there, but she's not Rachel anymore. She's tall and thin, and her eyes are black, and she's smiling at me with too many teeth. Behind her, the woman stands, waiting, hungry, eternal. "Mine," she says, and it sounds like a promise. And the grass at my feet curls into letters, writing out my fate in living green. Soon. I know I should fight it. I know I should run, leave the city, leave the state, put as much distance between myself and Gifford Pinchot as possible. But I also know it won't matter. She's in my skin now, in my blood, growing like roots toward my heart. The mark proves it. The grass proves it. The bones that keep appearing prove it. Last night I caught myself looking up directions to Taklak Lake, my finger hovering over the navigation button. It would be so easy. Just a few hours' drive, just a short walk into the trees. I'm writing this down in case someone finds it, in case it helps the next person who sees grass growing in letters and thinks it's strange but ultimately harmless. It's not. Don't read the messages. Don't stay to investigate. Don't let yourself be marked. And if you go camping in the Pacific Northwest, in the deep forests where the trees grow old and thick and the silence presses in like water, pay attention to the grass. If it starts to spell things out, if it curls into words and warnings and names, turn around. Leave immediately. Don't ask questions. Don't hesitate. Because she's waiting there, in the spaces between the trees, older than memory and hungrier than time. She claims what walks on her ground. She keeps what reads her words. And she never, ever lets go. The mark on my arm reached my shoulder this morning. I can feel it crawling toward my heart, slow and patient and inevitable. My car keys are on the table next to me. The GPS is already set. Soon, I'll stop fighting. Soon, I'll answer the call. Soon, I'll go home to the forest and the woman who waits there, who has been waiting since before the trees had names, who will wait long after the last human forgets what silence sounds like. She's written my name in the grass. 4. She's written it in bone and blood and the meat of the earth itself. And I brought my girlfriend Rachel and our 2 friends, Matt and God help Jennifer, I'm starting to Ocala National Forest in Central Florida because I wanted to show them the place where my grandfather used to take me when I was a kid. The forest sprawls across nearly 400,000 acres of sand pine scrub, swamps, and springs that run so clear you can see 30 feet down into limestone caverns. We rented a Class C RV, nothing fancy, just enough room for the 4 of us to sleep without being on top of each other. Rachel had been talking about getting away from Tampa for months, complaining about her job at the hospital, the endless shifts, the way the fluorescent lights made her feel like she was trapped in a humming box. Matt worked construction with me, and Jennifer taught elementary school. They'd been married for 6 years and were the kind of couple that finished each other's sentences, which I found both endearing and slightly annoying. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late October when the heat had finally broken and the humidity wasn't quite so oppressive. The campground we'd reserved was called Juniper Springs, tucked away on the eastern side of the forest where the Alexander Springs Creek wound through cypress stands and palmettos. The ranger at the check-in station was a woman in her 60s with sun-damaged skin and eyes that didn't quite meet mine when she handed over the campsite permit. She told us to watch out for bears and to keep our food locked up, standard warnings, but then she added something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Y'all staying the whole weekend?" she asked. "Through Sunday," I said. She nodded slowly, her mouth pulling into a tight line. "Well, you just make sure you keep that RV locked at night, and if you hear anything scratching around, don't go looking. You understand?" Rachel laughed nervously beside me. "What kind of scratching?" The ranger didn't answer directly. She just looked past us toward the tree line where the afternoon sun was starting to slant through the pines, casting long shadows that seemed to reach across the gravel parking lot like fingers. "Just keep it locked," she repeated. Our campsite was at the end of a narrow dirt road that split off from the main loop, isolated enough that we couldn't see any other campers through the trees. The RV fit perfectly in the clearing, and Matt backed it in with the kind of precision that came from years of driving heavy equipment. We spent the first hour setting up, leveling the RV, connecting the water and electric hookups, arranging our camp chairs in a circle around the fire pit. Jennifer brought out a cooler full of beer and hard seltzers, and Rachel started prepping vegetables for dinner while Matt and I gathered firewood from the surrounding area. The forest felt different than I remembered. As a kid, it had seemed magical, full of hidden springs and secret trails that my grandfather would lead me down while telling stories about the Seminole Indians who'd once hidden in these swamps from the U.S. Army. Now, at 34, with the weight of adult responsibilities pressing down on my shoulders, the forest felt watchful. The palmettos rustled even when there was no wind. The cypress trees stood in clusters that looked almost deliberate, like they'd been arranged by something that understood geometry. And the birds, there were hardly any birds, which struck me as odd for this time of year. "You're being weird," Rachel said when she caught me staring into the tree line while I was supposed to be chopping vegetables. She had her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and her scrubs were traded for cut-off shorts and a tank top that showed off the tattoo of a lotus flower on her shoulder blade. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said. "Just remembering stuff. Good stuff or bad stuff. I thought about my grandfather, about the way he died when I was 16, a sudden stroke that took him while he was sitting in his favorite chair watching the evening news. I thought about the last time we'd been in this forest together, how he'd pointed to a particular stand of cypress and told me that some trees grew over graves, that the roots fed on memory and loss. At the time, I'd thought he was just being poetic. Now, I wasn't so sure. "Good stuff," I lied. "That first night went fine. We grilled chicken and corn, drank too much, played cards by lantern light while moths battered themselves against the glass. Matt told a joke about a priest and a rabbi that I'd heard a dozen times before, but Jennifer laughed anyway, that full-throated laugh that made everyone else smile. Rachel leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and for a while I forgot about the ranger's warning and the strange absence of birdsong, and the feeling that something was watching us from the darkness beyond our circle of firelight. We went to bed around midnight. Matt and Jennifer took the bed above the cab, and Rachel and I got the fold-out couch in the back. The RV's walls were thin enough that we could hear them murmuring to each other, then the rhythmic creaking that made Rachel giggle into my chest. I held her close and listened to the forest outside, the chorus of tree frogs, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of something moving through the underbrush. I fell asleep thinking about my grandfather's hands, how they'd been scarred and calloused from a lifetime of work, but gentle when he'd shown me how to tie fishing knots or identify animal tracks in the mud. I woke to the sound of scratching. It was still dark, that deep darkness that comes in the hours before dawn when even the moon has set and the stars provide no useful light. Rachel was asleep beside me, her breathing slow and even. The scratching came from outside near the back of the RV, a steady, rhythmic sound like fingernails dragging across metal. My first thought was raccoon or possum, something looking for food scraps. But the sound was too deliberate, too controlled. It moved in vertical lines down the RV's exterior wall, then paused, then started again. I lay there in the darkness, my heart hammering, telling myself it was nothing, just an animal, just the wind, just my imagination conjuring threats where none existed. But the scratching continued, and now I could hear something else beneath it, a wet, breathing sound, like something panting. The scratching stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard a voice. It was faint, barely audible, but it sounded like my grandfather. "Caleb," it whispered. "Caleb, come outside." Every muscle in my body locked up. Rachel stirred beside me but didn't wake. From the front of the RV, I heard Matt's snoring, a reassuring rumble that meant he was deep asleep. The voice came again, clearer this time. "I need to show you something, boy. Come outside." I absolutely knew, that my grandfather was dead. I'd watched them lower his casket into the ground at the cemetery in Ocala. I'd felt the terrible finality of dirt hitting wood. But the voice sounded exactly like him. That gravelly tone with the slight southern drawl that came from spending his whole life in Florida. And beneath my fear was a desperate, childish hope that maybe, somehow, he was out there. That maybe death wasn't as permanent as I'd believed. I slid out from under the covers, careful not to wake Rachel. The RV's floor was cold under my bare feet. I moved toward the back door, my hand reaching for the lock when something stopped me. It wasn't rational thought, it was pure instinct, some ancient part of my brain screaming at me to stop, to not open that door, to not trust the voice no matter how familiar it sounded. I stood there in the darkness, my hand hovering over the lock while the voice called to me again. "Caleb, don't you want to see me? Don't you miss your old grandpa?" There was something wrong with the cadence now, something slightly off about the way it pronounced certain words, too slow, too careful, like someone learning a language from a recording. And underneath the words, I heard that wet breathing again, louder now, coming from just outside the door. I stepped backward, my heel catching on the edge of the couch. Rachel woke with a start. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Nothing," I said, my voice shaking. "Just thought I heard something." We listened together in the darkness. The wet breathing had stopped. The forest outside had gone completely silent. No tree frogs, no insects, nothing. Just a terrible, waiting quiet that pressed against the RV's thin walls like water against a dam. "Let's try to get some sleep," Rachel said, but I could hear the fear in her voice. I didn't sleep. I lay there watching the back door, waiting for the scratching to start again, but it never did. When dawn finally came and gray light began filtering through the RV's windows, I felt like I'd aged 10 years in a single night. Matt was the first one up, cheerful and oblivious as he started making coffee. "Man, I slept like the dead," he said, then caught himself. "Sorry, bad choice of words." Jennifer emerged from the cab over bed, her blonde hair sticking up in all directions. She looked at me with concern. "You okay? You look terrible." "Didn't sleep well," I said. Rachel was already dressed, pulling on her hiking boots. She wouldn't look at me directly, which meant she was more shaken than she wanted to admit. We'd been together for 3 years, and I'd learned to read her silences. After breakfast, I did what I'd been dreading. I went outside to check the back of the RV. The morning was cool and humid, mist rising from the ground in ghostly columns. Birds were singing again, which I found both reassuring and disturbing, as if their absence the night before had been some kind of warning that we'd failed to heed. The scratches were there, 4 parallel lines running down the RV's aluminum siding, each about 3 feet long. They were deep enough that I could feel them with my fingers, gouges that had peeled away the white paint to reveal bare metal underneath. The spacing between the lines was too wide for a raccoon, too precise for a bear. They looked like claw marks, but the claws would have had to be as long as my hand. "Holy shit," Matt said behind me. He'd followed me out without me noticing. "What the hell did that?" "I don't know. Should we call the ranger?" I thought about the woman's warning, about her refusal to meet my eyes, about the way she'd told us to keep the RV locked without explaining why. "I don't think she'd be surprised," I said. We spent the morning at Juniper Springs, trying to recapture the vacation feeling we'd had when we first arrived. The spring was beautiful, a perfect circle of crystal-clear water surrounded by limestone and cypress, the kind of place that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood what paradise should look like. We swam and floated and tried to forget about the scratches and the voice that had called to me in the darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Several times I turned quickly, trying to catch whatever was at the edge of my peripheral vision, but there was never anything there. Just trees and shadows and the occasional flicker of movement that could have been a bird or a lizard or nothing at all. Rachel stayed close to me in the water, her hand finding mine beneath the surface. "We should leave," she whispered. "Something's wrong with this place." "It's just one more night," I said. "We'll pack up tomorrow morning and be gone by noon." She looked at me with those dark eyes that had first attracted me to her at a friend's barbecue 3 years ago, and I saw real fear there. "Promise me we'll leave if anything else happens." "I promise." Jennifer seemed fine, laughing and splashing with Matt, but I noticed she kept looking toward the tree line too, her smile faltering whenever she thought no one was watching. Matt was the only one who seemed genuinely relaxed, diving down to the bottom of the spring and coming up with handfuls of limestone pebbles that he'd skip across the surface. We got back to the campsite around 3 in the afternoon. The scratches on the RV seemed more pronounced in the daylight, like they'd somehow deepened while we were gone. I told myself that was impossible, that they just looked worse because I was paying more attention, but the explanation felt hollow. That evening, as we were preparing dinner, Jennifer found something that made all of us stop what we were doing. "Guys," she said, her voice high and tight, "what is this?" She was standing near the fire pit, pointing at the ground. We gathered around her and looked at what she'd found. A circle of small bones arranged in a perfect ring, each bone placed upright in the dirt with its end pointing toward the sky. They were clean and white, picked completely free of flesh, and in the center of the circle was a single black feather. "Some kind of animal killed something here," Matt said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Animals don't arrange bones in patterns," Jennifer said. She was hugging herself, rubbing her arms like she was cold despite the warmth of the afternoon. "People do this." "People or what?" Rachel asked. Jennifer shook her head. "I don't know. I don't want to know. I want to go home." Matt put his arm around her. "Let's just calm down. It's probably some teenagers messing around, trying to scare campers. We'll report it to the ranger in the morning." But I'd seen my grandfather do something similar once, when I was 9 or 10. We'd been camping in the same forest, and he'd arranged bones in a circle around our tent. When I'd asked him why, he'd said it was protection, that certain patterns kept certain things away. I'd asked him what kinds of things, and he'd just smiled and told me not to worry about it, that the bones would do their job. I hadn't thought about that memory in 20 years. Now it came flooding back with a clarity that made my stomach turn. We kicked the bones apart and scattered them into the underbrush, though I had the irrational feeling that we'd just broken something important, that we'd destroyed a barrier we were going to wish we'd kept intact. Jennifer wanted to leave right then, but Matt convinced her to stay, pointing out that it was getting dark and driving the RV through the forest at night on these narrow dirt roads would be more dangerous than staying put. "First thing in the morning," he promised her. "We'll pack up at sunrise and be out of here before breakfast." Dinner was a tense affair. We ate quickly, barely talking, our eyes constantly drawn to the darkness between the trees. The fire we built seemed smaller than the one from the night before, its light not reaching as far, as if the darkness had somehow grown denser and more resistant to illumination. When we finally retreated into the RV around 9 o'clock, I made sure every window was closed and locked, every door secured. "You're scaring me," Rachel said as I checked the back door for the 3rd time. "Good," I said. "We should be scared. Something's not right here." "Then why aren't we leaving?" I didn't have a good answer for that. Pride, maybe. Stubbornness. The male instinct to not appear weak in front of other men. All stupid reasons that seemed even stupider when I thought about the scratches on the RV and the voice that had called my name in the darkness. We tried to play cards again, but none of us could concentrate. Matt kept checking his phone even though there was no signal out here. Jennifer had her arms wrapped around her knees, making herself as small as possible in the breakfast nook. Rachel sat next to me, her leg pressed against mine, taking comfort in the contact. "What did your grandfather used to tell you about this place?" Rachel asked suddenly. Everyone looked at me. "Stories," I said. "Just old stories." What kind of stories?" I thought about how to explain it, about all the things my grandfather had told me during those camping trips when I was too young to know whether he was serious or just trying to entertain a kid. He'd talked about the Seminole beliefs, about how the forest was home to spirits that could take any shape they wanted, that could mimic voices and faces and memories. He'd told me about settlers who'd disappeared into the swamps and been found weeks later, alive but changed, speaking in languages no one recognized and claiming to have lived entire lifetimes in the space of a few days. He'd said the forest remembered things, that it held on to the pain and fear that had seeped into its soil over centuries of conflict and death. But I'd always assumed these were just campfire tales, the kind of stories adults tell children to make the wilderness seem more exciting and dangerous than it really is. "He said the forest could trick you," I said finally, "that it could show you things that weren't real, make you hear things that weren't there. He said you had to be careful not to trust anything after dark." "That's comforting," Matt said, trying for humor but not quite landing it. The scratching started at 10:37. I know the exact time because I was staring at my phone, watching the minutes tick by when the first metallic scrape echoed through the RV's interior. It came from the back again, the same area as the night before, but louder this time. More insistent. We all froze. The scratching continued, 4 parallel lines being drawn down the exterior wall, slow and deliberate. Then it stopped, and we heard footsteps. Heavy, thudding steps that circled the RV, moving from the back around to the driver's side. "What the fuck is that?" Matt whispered. The footsteps stopped outside the driver's side door. We heard breathing. That same, wet, labored breathing I'd heard the night before. Then came a knock, 3 sharp raps on the door that made all of us jump. "Hello," a voice called. It was female, young with a slight country accent. "Y'all in there? I need some help. My car broke down." None of us moved. The voice sounded completely normal, completely human, but I was thinking about what my grandfather had said, about things that could mimic, about how the forest could show you what you wanted to see, or what you feared most. "Please," the voice said, and now there was a sob in it. "I've been walking for hours. I just need to use a phone. Please." Jennifer started to stand up, her face creased with concern, but Matt grabbed her arm. "Don't," he said. "But what if someone really needs help?" Jennifer said. "Look at the window," I said. We all turned to the driver's side window. The curtain was drawn, but there was a gap of about an inch where we could see outside. The moon had risen, nearly full, casting enough light to see the clearing around the RV, but there was nothing there. No person, no broken-down car, nothing but empty space and the shadows of trees. The knocking came again, more insistent. "I can see your lights," the voice said. "I know you're in there. Why won't you help me?" And then the voice changed. It dropped about an octave, losing its human quality, becoming something that sounded like it was being played through a broken speaker. "Let me in," it said. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The RV began to shake. Something was pushing against it from outside, rocking it on its suspension. The dishes in the sink rattled. The hanging lamp above the table swung back and forth. Rachel screamed and grabbed onto me, her nails digging into my arm. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the blood rushing through my veins. We waited, barely breathing, for something else to happen. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 20. "It's gone," Matt finally said, but he didn't sound convinced. None of us slept that night. We sat in the RV's living area, all the lights on, taking turns watching the windows. I kept the RV keys in my pocket, ready to start the engine and drive out of there if whatever was outside came back. But nothing else happened. The hours dragged by with agonizing slowness, each minute feeling like 10, until finally the eastern sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn. As soon as there was enough light to see by, we started packing up. We moved in silent agreement, working quickly and efficiently. Jennifer threw clothes into bags without bothering to fold them. Matt disconnected the water and electric hookups. Rachel collapsed the camp chairs and loaded them into the RV's storage compartments. I did a walk around to make sure everything was secure. That's when I found the tent. It was set up about 50 yards into the tree line, just barely visible through the palmetto scrub. A small dome tent, the kind you could buy at any camping store, in a faded green color that helped it blend into the surroundings. The front flap was partially open, moving slightly in the morning breeze. "Guys," I called out, "come look at this." They joined me at the edge of the clearing, all of us staring at the tent. "Was that there yesterday?" Rachel asked. "I don't think so," I said. "I would have noticed it." "Maybe it's that girl," Jennifer said, "the one who needed help. Maybe she gave up and pitched a tent." But the tent looked old, weathered by more than just a single night outdoors. The fabric was stained and torn in places, and there was something about the way it sat there in the shadows. Something wrong that I couldn't quite articulate. "We should check on her," Jennifer said. "Make sure she's okay." "No," I said immediately. "We're leaving. Now." "But what if—" "Jennifer, listen to me." I turned to face her, trying to make her understand. That tent has been there for a long time. Weeks, maybe months. And whatever was outside last night, whatever was scratching at the RV and knocking on the door, it wasn't a person. You know that. We all know that. She looked at the tent again, her face pale in the dawn light. Then what was it? I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer that would make any sense, that wouldn't sound insane. Instead, I walked back to the RV and climbed into the driver's seat. The others followed, and within 5 minutes we were rolling down the dirt road toward the main campground entrance. We'd made it maybe half a mile when the road ended. I'm not talking about reaching a dead end or a fork in the road. The road we were on, the same road we'd driven down 2 days earlier, simply stopped. One moment we were driving on packed dirt with tire ruts and clear signs of regular use, and the next moment we were facing dense forest, trees growing so close together that there was no way to drive between them, their roots creating an impassable tangle across ground that should have been a road. I stopped the RV and stared. Behind me, I heard Matt say, "What the fuck?" "This is wrong," Rachel said. "The road was here. We drove down this road." I put the RV in reverse and backed up, thinking maybe I'd gotten turned around. Maybe we'd somehow taken a wrong turn. But after backing up for 100 yards, I stopped and tried going forward again. Same result. The road disappeared into impossible forest. "Try another direction," Matt said. We spent the next hour driving around the campground, trying every road and trail we could find. They all ended the same way. Sudden, impossible barriers of trees that looked like they'd been growing there for centuries. It was like the forest had closed around us, sealing us in. By the time we returned to our original campsite, we were all close to panic. Jennifer was crying quietly in the breakfast nook. Matt kept muttering about how this wasn't possible, how roads don't just disappear. Rachel had her phone out trying to get a signal, but there was nothing. Not even the emergency calling option that usually worked anywhere. "We need to stay calm," I said, though I felt anything but calm. "We'll hike out if we have to. The main highway can't be more than a few miles from here." "What about the RV?" Matt asked. "Fuck the RV. We'll come back for it later with help." We packed light bags with water, food, and basic supplies. I found a compass in one of the storage compartments and a detailed map of the national forest that my grandfather had given me years ago. According to the map, the nearest highway was about 3 miles due east. We could make that in an hour, even hiking through rough terrain. We set out at 9 in the morning, the 4 of us walking single file with Matt in the lead and me bringing up the rear. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, just the sound of our footsteps on the sandy soil and the rustle of palmetto fronds brushing against our legs. After what felt like an hour of walking, but could have been less, time seemed to move strangely under the forest canopy. We came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a tent. It was the same tent we'd seen near our campsite. Same faded green color, same torn fabric, same partially open front flap. I checked the compass. We'd been walking east the entire time, never turning or deviating from our course. There was no way we should have circled back to our campsite. "I don't understand," Jennifer said. She was shaking, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. How is this?" "We need to try again," Matt said. "Different direction. We'll go north this time." But I was looking at the tent, really looking at it for the first time. The front flap was open just wide enough that I could see inside, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice. There were sleeping bags in there, 4 of them, and they were occupied. I could see the shapes of bodies lying still inside the sleeping bags, could see the rise and fall of breathing, could see, and this is what made me want to run screaming into the forest, the faces. They were our faces. Matt, Jennifer, Rachel, and me, all sleeping peacefully in a tent that should have been abandoned. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Rachel grabbed my arm. "Tell me you see that too. Tell me I'm not losing my mind." Matt took a step toward the tent and I grabbed him. "Don't," I said. "Don't go near it." "But that's us," he said. "That's fucking us in there." "It's not us. It's something pretending to be us." As if responding to our voices, the shapes in the sleeping bags began to move. They sat up slowly, mechanically, and turned to face us. Their faces were perfect copies, exact replicas down to the scar on Matt's chin and the mole on Jennifer's cheek and the way Rachel's hair fell across her forehead. But their eyes were wrong. Empty. Like looking into wells with no bottom. The thing with my face smiled. Its mouth opened too wide, wider than any human mouth should open, revealing rows of teeth that looked sharp and wrong. "Come inside," it said in my voice. "Come lie down. It's so comfortable here." We ran. I don't remember making the decision to run. It just happened. All 4 of us turning and crashing back into the forest the way we'd come. Branches whipped at our faces. Roots tried to trip us. Behind us, I could hear footsteps keeping pace, could hear something crashing through the underbrush, but I didn't dare look back. We burst into our campsite and scrambled into the RV, slamming and locking the door behind us. I ran to the driver's seat and started the engine, but I had nowhere to go. All the roads ended in impossible forest, so we just sat there, the engine idling, while we tried to catch our breath and process what we'd seen. "What the fuck was that?" Matt kept saying. "What the fuck, what the fuck, what the fuck?" Jennifer had curled up on the couch, her whole body shaking. Rachel held her, murmuring reassurances that neither of them believed. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, gripping it so tightly that my knuckles turned white, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. "Your grandfather knew," Rachel said suddenly. "He knew about this place. That's why he told you those stories. That's why he brought you here. To teach you how to survive it." "He never told me how to survive it," I said. "He just told me to be careful." "What else did he tell you?" "There must be something. Some trick, some way to break free." I tried to remember, rifling through decades-old memories of camping trips and late-night conversations. My grandfather had told me so many things, had filled my head with folklore and superstition that I'd dismissed as an adult. But one thing kept coming back to me. Something he'd said on our last trip together, just a few months before he died. "The forest feeds on fear," I said slowly, the memory surfacing like something floating up from deep water. He said that's what keeps it strong, what lets it hold people here. Fear and belief. The more you believe in it, the more power you give it. "So what, we're supposed to just not be afraid," Matt said. "Kind of hard to do when there are fucking copies of us sleeping in a tent." "Not just not be afraid," I said. "We have to not believe in it. We have to treat it like it's not real." "But it is real," Jennifer said. "We saw it. We all saw it." Did we? I turned to face them. Or did we see what the forest wanted us to see? Think about it. The roads that disappear, the tent that follows us, the things with our faces. None of it makes physical sense. None of it can actually exist. So maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe it only has as much power as we give it. They stared at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. but it was the only explanation that made any sense, the only way to reconcile what we'd experienced with what I knew to be possible. "So we just drive out?" Rachel asked. "We pick a road and drive and pretend that it doesn't end?" "Yes. That's insane. You have a better idea?" She didn't. None of them did. So I put the RV in gear, picked a direction at random, and started driving. The road ahead looked clear for about 30 yards, then the trees closed in, forming an impenetrable wall. I kept driving. "Caleb," Matt said nervously. "Caleb, you need to stop." "No, we're going to hit the trees." "We're not. There are no trees. It's just a road." 20 yards. 15. The trees loomed in front of us, massive pines and oaks with trunks as thick as the RV was wide. Jennifer screamed. Rachel grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back to make me stop. 10 yards. 5. I could see the bark on the trees, could see individual leaves, could see the shadows between the trunks where the forest floor was dark and waiting. I closed my eyes and kept driving. There was no impact, no crash. When I opened my eyes again, we were on a paved road, a proper highway with yellow lines painted down the center and a green distance sign that said, Ocala, 15 miles. For a long moment, nobody spoke. We just sat there in stunned silence, watching the normal world scroll past the windows, gas stations and strip malls and cars full of people who had no idea what we'd just survived. "Did that really happen?" Jennifer finally asked. "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. We drove straight to the ranger station at the forest entrance. The same woman from before was working the desk, and when she saw us, her expression didn't change. She looked like she'd been expecting us. "You folks heading out?" she asked. "What the fuck is in that forest?" Matt demanded. "What the fuck did you send us into?" She sighed and folded her hands on the desk in front of her. "I warned you to keep the RV locked. I warned you not to go looking if you heard things. Did you follow my instructions? You should have told us what was out there," I said. "Would you have believed me?" She looked at me with those eyes that had refused to meet mine 3 days earlier. "Would you have listened if I'd told you the forest tricks people, traps them, makes them see things? Or would you have thought I was crazy and gone anyway?" I didn't have an answer for that. "The forest is old," she continued. "Older than any of us. Older than this country. It's got its own ways, its own rules. Most people come through just fine. They camp and hike and leave and never know anything was wrong. But some people who are sensitive or who have history with the place, the forest takes an interest in them. It shows them things, tests them. And if they're smart enough and strong enough to pass the tests, it lets them go." "What if they're not?" Rachel asked. The ranger looked at her for a long moment. "Then they stay. That tent," I said. "The one we found. Those things inside it. Not your concern anymore," the ranger said. "You made it out. That's all that matters. My advice? Don't come back, and don't talk about what you saw. Nobody will believe you anyway." We left. We drove straight back to Tampa, barely speaking, each of us lost in our own thoughts and trying to process what had happened. Over the following weeks, we tried to convince ourselves that we'd somehow hallucinated the whole thing, that maybe the water at the campsite had been contaminated with something, that there had to be a rational explanation. But the scratches on the RV were real. I had them sanded down and repainted, but I know they were there. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I remember the thing with my face in that tent, remember how it smiled with too many teeth and told me to come lie down. A month after we got back, Jennifer and Matt separated. He said she'd changed, that she wasn't the same person anymore. She'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, talking about trees growing through the bedroom walls, about forests that never ended. The last I heard, she was in a psychiatric facility somewhere in Georgia, still insisting that we never actually left Ocala National Forest, that we're still there, sleeping in a tent while something wears our skin in the world outside. Rachel broke up with me 6 weeks later. She said she couldn't stand to look at me anymore, couldn't trust that I was really me and not some copy, some trick of the forest. I understood. I felt the same way about her sometimes, about everyone. How do you know the people around you are real? How do you know you're real? I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened, even if they don't believe it. I'm writing it down because 3 nights ago I heard scratching on my apartment window, even though I live on the 4th floor. I'm writing it down because when I looked outside, I saw trees growing in the parking lot. Trees that weren't there before. Trees that are getting closer to my building every night. The ranger was wrong about one thing. The forest doesn't just test you and let you go. It marks you. It claims you. And no matter how far you drive or how much you try to forget, it's always there, waiting for you to close your eyes, waiting for you to stop believing in the reality you think you escaped to. I can hear something scratching at my door now. 4 parallel lines, dragging down the wood. And I know what I'm going to find when I open it. I know whose face it will be wearing, whose voice it will use to ask me to come outside, to come back to the forest where I belong. My grandfather tried to teach me how to survive it, but he never told me the most important thing, that survival isn't escape. It's just a different kind of trap, a longer game the forest plays, letting you think you're free while it slowly pulls you back into its hungry, patient embrace. The scratching has stopped. I can hear breathing on the other side of the door. In a moment, I'll hear the knock, 3 sharp raps. Then a voice I recognize, my grandfather's voice maybe, or Rachel's, or my own. It doesn't matter whose voice it uses. The forest has been calling me back since the day we left, and I'm tired of running, tired of pretending I ever really escaped. I think I'm going to open the door. I think I'm going to answer. I think I've been answering all along. Story 5. I'm Stella, 32 years old, and I thought Lake Jockasee in South Carolina would be the perfect place to clear my head after the divorce. The RV rental seemed like a good idea. Freedom, solitude, nature. I'd heard the lake was pristine, surrounded by dense forest and ancient mountains, fed by waterfalls that locals said were older than memory. What I didn't know was that some places remember things they shouldn't, and some waters hold more than fish. I arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late September when the tourist season had tapered off and the campground was nearly empty. The ranger at the entrance, a weathered man in his 60s with eyes that seemed permanently squinted against some distant brightness, took longer than necessary to process my permit. "Just you?" he asked, not looking up from his clipboard. "Just me," I confirmed. He nodded slowly, still not meeting my eyes. Water's been strange this year. Cold currents where there shouldn't be any. Fish acting peculiar. You planning to swim? Maybe. Why? Just stay close to shore if you do, and if you see anything unusual, don't investigate. Come straight back and tell us. He finally looked at me then, and something in his expression made my skin prickle. People get lost out here. Not often, but when they do, they don't always come back the same. I laughed nervously. You trying to scare off your customers? No, ma'am. Just trying to keep you safe. He handed me the permit and a map with a single campsite circled in red ink. You're in Site 17. It's isolated, which I figure is what you want, but there's other campers within shouting distance if you need help. Cell service is spotty. Radio's in the office if there's an emergency. The drive to Site 17 took me deeper into the forest than I'd expected, the paved road giving way to gravel, then to packed dirt riddled with roots. The RV, a 23-foot Winnebago that had seen better days, lurched and groaned over the uneven terrain. Through the windshield, the trees seemed to press closer with each passing mile, their branches forming a canopy so thick that the afternoon sun barely penetrated. When I finally reached the campsite, I understood why it had been available on such short notice. It sat at the end of a narrow peninsula that jutted into the lake, surrounded on 3 sides by water. The forest behind the clearing was dense and dark, a wall of pine and oak that seemed to absorb sound. The lake itself was beautiful in an unsettling way, the water so clear and still it looked like black glass, reflecting the darkening sky with perfect mirror-like precision. I spent the first hour setting up, leveling the RV, connecting the water line to my tank, arranging my supplies. The physical work felt good, kept my mind occupied. I'd brought books, a journal, enough food for 2 weeks. My plan was simple. Disconnect, decompress, figure out who I was now that I wasn't half of a couple anymore. As twilight settled over the lake, I built a small fire in the metal ring someone had left at the site. The flames took quickly, crackling and spitting sparks into the cooling air. I made coffee on my camp stove and sat in a folding chair, watching the sky fade from purple to black. The first stars appeared, and I felt something in my chest loosen for the first time in months. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a fish jumping, or maybe a piece of driftwood bobbing to the surface. But as I watched, the shape became clearer. About 30 feet from shore, something pale broke the surface of the water. It was there for only a second or two, but long enough for me to see that it was a hand. Fingers spread wide, palm up, as if waving. I stood up so fast my chair tipped backward. My coffee cup hit the dirt, the liquid seeping into the ground. I stared at the spot where I'd seen it, but the water was smooth again, undisturbed. In the firelight, the lake's surface looked like hammered metal. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin and uncertain. "Is someone out there?" Silence. Not even the sound of water lapping at the shore. The forest behind me was equally quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant owl calls. Just an oppressive, heavy silence that made my ears ring. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the water's edge, my heart hammering. The beam cut across the dark surface, illuminating nothing but empty water. I swept the light left and right, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Just my reflection staring back at me from the glassy surface, looking pale and frightened. "You're tired," I told myself aloud, needing to hear a human voice, even my own. "Long drive. Stressed. You're seeing things." But I couldn't shake the image from my mind. That pale hand, the fingers slightly curled, the deliberate, almost beckoning quality of the gesture. I stood there for another 10 minutes, watching and listening, but nothing else appeared. Eventually, I retreated to the RV, locking the door behind me despite knowing how absurd that was. What was a locked door going to protect me from? Still, the simple act of turning the deadbolt made me feel marginally safer. I closed all the curtains, shutting out the view of the lake, and tried to read by the overhead light. The words swam on the page. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see something pressed against the glass. Sleep came reluctantly, in fits and starts. I kept jerking awake, convinced I'd heard something. A splash, a footstep on gravel, a wet sliding sound against the side of the RV. Each time, I'd lie there in the darkness, straining to hear over the thunder of my own heartbeat. But there was never anything. The second morning dawned gray and humid. A thick fog had rolled in overnight, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. When I opened the door and stepped outside, the world felt muffled and claustrophobic. The lake was invisible beyond the fog, and the forest behind the campsite looked like a solid wall of white. I made breakfast on the camp stove, eggs and toast, and sat in my chair, eating mechanically while the fog swirled around me. The silence was different in daylight, less oppressive but somehow more wrong. There should have been birds, insects, the distant sound of other campers. Instead, there was nothing. After breakfast, I decided to explore the shoreline, partly to familiarize myself with the area and partly to prove to myself that there was nothing unusual about the lake. I followed the water's edge north, the fog thinning as I walked, revealing more of the landscape. The shore was rocky in places, sandy in others, littered with bleached driftwood that looked like bones. About a quarter mile from my campsite, I found the first one. It was half buried in the sand, the fingers visible above the waterline. My breath caught in my throat as I approached, certain I was looking at a corpse. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't real flesh. It was too pale, too smooth, the texture wrong. I crouched down and brushed away the sand. It was a mannequin hand, severed at the wrist. The plastic was old and weathered, but the craftsmanship was unsettling. The details of the knuckles, the lifelines on the palm, even tiny wrinkles at the joints. Someone had gone to great effort to make it look real. I stood up quickly, my skin crawling. Who would leave something like this at a lake? And why? I continued walking, telling myself it was just trash, maybe from some old art project or Halloween display that had washed up from somewhere upstream. But 50 yards further, I found another one. This one was positioned differently, planted upright in the mud so that it appeared to be reaching up from beneath the ground. The fingers were bent slightly, as if grasping for something. "What the hell?" I whispered. I found 3 more before I turned back, each one carefully positioned, each one so realistic in detail that my first instinct was always that I was looking at actual human remains. They were all hands, all right hands, all reaching or waving or grasping. When I got back to my campsite, the fog had burned off, revealing the full expanse of the lake. The water was that same unsettling black glass stillness, and now that I could see clearly, I realized just how isolated my site was. The nearest other campsite was barely visible, at least half a mile away across a stretch of forest. I saw no movement, no signs of life. I spent the afternoon trying to distract myself with mundane tasks, organizing my supplies, writing in my journal, attempting to read. But my mind kept returning to those hands, to the waving gesture I'd seen in the water the night before. There was something deliberate about it all, something staged. But for whom? And why? As evening approached, I found myself dreading nightfall. The thought of sitting out by the fire again, watching that dark water, filled me with a creeping anxiety I couldn't shake. I decided to stay in the RV, to keep the lights on, to convince myself that everything was fine. But at 9:30, I heard the splashing. It started soft, rhythmic, like someone swimming with steady strokes. I froze, my book forgotten in my lap, and listened. The sound was coming from the lake, moving parallel to the shore. Back and forth, never getting closer or farther away. I moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. The moon had risen, nearly full, painting the landscape in shades of silver and black. I could see the water clearly, could see the ripples spreading across its surface from something moving through it, but I couldn't see what was making them. The source of the disturbance was hidden beneath the surface, creating a wake without ever breaking through. The splashing continued for almost 20 minutes. I stood at the window the entire time, my breath fogging the glass, unable to look away. There was something hypnotic about it. The steady rhythm, the precise back-and-forth pattern. It reminded me of a metronome, or a pendulum, or the ticking of a clock counting down to something. Then it stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound. The water smoothed itself out, the ripples fading, until the surface was once again that perfect mirror-like stillness. I waited, counting my heartbeats, but nothing else happened. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the narrow RV bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the vehicle settling, every whisper of wind through the trees, every distant splash or rustle that might have been nothing or might have been everything. The mannequin hands kept appearing in my mind's eye, positioned like markers or warnings or invitations. When dawn finally came, gray and reluctant, I made a decision. I would pack up, leave, cut my trip short. Whatever was happening here, whether it was teenagers playing pranks or some weird local tradition or just my own stress-induced paranoia, I didn't want any part of it. I was pulling on my shoes when I heard the knock. 3 deliberate raps on the RV door, knuckles on metal. I went completely still, my shoe half-tied, every muscle locked. There shouldn't be anyone here. I hadn't seen another soul since arriving, hadn't heard any vehicles on the access road. "Hello," a voice called, female, young. "Is anyone in there? I need help." I approached the door slowly, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. Through the small window, I could see a figure. A woman, maybe early 20s, wearing a damp hoodie and jeans. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, water dripping from the ends. "Please," she said, seeing me through the glass. "My friends and I were out on the lake last night and our boat capsized. I've been swimming for hours. I need to use your phone." Something about her voice was off, too flat, too rehearsed, like she was reading lines. But she looked genuinely wet, genuinely exhausted. I unlocked the door and opened it a few inches, keeping the chain engaged. "There's no cell service out here," I said. "But there's a radio at the ranger station. I can drive you. Can I just come in for a minute? I'm so cold. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I just need to warm up. I'll get you a blanket," I said, not opening the door further. "Wait here." I turned to grab a blanket from the storage compartment, and when I looked back, she was gone. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, looking around. The campsite was empty. No footprints in the dirt, no wet tracks leading away. Nothing. "Hello," I called. "Miss?" The lake was calm. The forest was silent. There was no sign anyone had been there. I looked down at the ground where she'd been standing. The dirt was bone dry. No water, no footprints, nothing. My hands were shaking as I went back inside and locked the door. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, my phone, useless as it was without service. I would pack later, or not at all. I just needed to get to the ranger station, to talk to someone real, to get out of this place. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. Nothing. I tried again. The engine didn't even turn over, didn't even try to catch. It was completely dead, as if someone had pulled the battery. "No, no, no," I muttered, trying again and again, pumping the gas, checking that everything was connected. But the RV was dead. I grabbed my flashlight and got out to check under the hood. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely work the latch. When I finally got it open and shined my light on the engine, I saw it immediately. The battery cables had been cut. Not frayed, not corroded. Cut. The ends were clean, deliberate. I stumbled backward, the flashlight beam swinging wildly. Someone had done this. While I'd been inside, someone had sabotaged my vehicle. I ran back to the RV and locked myself in, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I needed to think. Needed to make a plan. The ranger station was maybe 3 miles away on foot. If I started walking now, I could be there before dark. I could. The splashing started again. Louder this time, more urgent, and now it was coming from all directions, north, south, east, surrounding my peninsula. I moved to the window and looked out. The water was churning, roiling with movement just beneath the surface. Whatever was down there was more than one. Many more. They moved in coordinated patterns, circling the peninsula, creating waves that lapped at the shore with increasing violence. And then, one by one, they began to surface. Hands. Dozens of them. Pale and wet and reaching up from the black water. Fingers splayed, palms up, waving in perfect unison. But these weren't mannequins. These were real. I could see the tendons standing out beneath the skin. Could see the wrinkles and veins and the subtle movements that only living flesh could make. Except they couldn't be real, because they had no arms attached to them. They simply emerged from the water at the wrist as if the lake itself had grown appendages. I watched, paralyzed with terror as they waved, a slow, deliberate motion, back and forth, back and forth. There must have been 50 of them, maybe more. All moving in perfect synchronization. The sight was so wrong, so fundamentally impossible that my mind struggled to process it. Then they stopped waving and pointed. All of them, every single hand, turned and pointed directly at the RV. Directly at me. I staggered away from the window, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I was having a breakdown, a psychotic break, stress-induced hallucinations brought on by the divorce, and the scratching started. All around the RV, on every side, nails dragging across metal. Slow and deliberate, like something was testing the surface, looking for a way in. The sound set my teeth on edge, made my skin crawl. I grabbed a knife from the kitchenette, a stupid, inadequate defense against whatever was out there. The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then something heavy hit the roof. I screamed, the knife clattering from my hand. Above me, I could hear wet footsteps, slap, 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 moving from one end of the RV to the other. Whatever was up there was big, and it was walking on 2 feet. The skylight in the sleeping area darkened as something moved across it. I saw fingers, long, pale, too many joints, pressing against the plastic, feeling the edges, testing for weakness. Then a face appeared, pressed against the transparent surface. It was human, mostly. Female features, young, with dark hair, but the proportions were wrong. The eyes too large and too far apart, the mouth too wide, stretching nearly ear to ear, and the smile. God, that smile. It split the face almost in half, revealing rows of thin, needle-like teeth. It was the woman from earlier. Or something wearing her face. It tapped on the skylight with one elongated finger. Tap, tap, tap. Then she spoke, her voice muffled but clear. "Let me in, Stella. I'm so cold." How did she know my name? I'd never told her my name. I ran to the door, intending to make a break for it, to run into the forest and take my chances. But when I looked through the window, I saw them. Dozens of figures standing in a loose semicircle around the RV. They were all shapes and sizes, men, women, children, but they all had the same wrong proportions, the same too wide mouths, the same dead eyes that reflected the moonlight like an animal's. And they were all dripping wet, leaving puddles on the ground that reflected their forms with perfect, impossible clarity. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The windows were too small to crawl through. The door was the only exit, and they were waiting outside. I was trapped. The scratching resumed, all around now, accompanied by low, wet laughter. The thing on the roof moved again, and I heard the skylight creak under its weight. Think, Stella, think. The radio. The ranger had mentioned a radio in the office, but surely the RV had one too. I tore through the cabinets, throwing aside supplies, looking for anything that might help. In a compartment beneath the bench seat, I found it. An old CB radio, dusty but intact. I grabbed it, my hands shaking as I tried to remember how these things worked. There was a handset, a dial, a power button that glowed green when I pressed it. Static filled the air, loud and crackling. "Hello?" I said into the handset, my voice cracking. "Is anyone there? This is Site 17 at Lake Jockasee. I need help. Please, if anyone can hear me." The static shifted, resolving into a voice. But it wasn't the ranger. It was a child, speaking in a sing-song tone. Stella went down to the water's edge. Stella saw a hand wave. Stella should have run away, but Stella was so brave. I dropped the handset, bile rising in my throat. The voice continued, now coming from all around me. Not just from the radio. Stella cut her battery cables. Stella trapped herself real good. Stella thought she'd be here 2 weeks. But Stella's here for good. The scratching intensified, the sound of nails becoming the sound of things breaking, plastic cracking, metal bending. They were trying to get in. And they would. Eventually, they would. I looked around frantically for anything I could use. The propane tank. If I could create an explosion, a distraction, maybe. No, that was insane. I'd kill myself. But staying here was death too. A slower, more terrible death. I made my decision. I grabbed everything flammable I could find. Paper towels, clothes, the contents of the first aid kit's alcohol bottle, and piled them near the door. The propane line ran from the external tank through the wall to the stove. I turned the knob, hearing the hiss of gas escaping. The smell filled the air, sharp and dangerous. The skylight cracked. A pale hand thrust through, scattering plastic fragments, reaching down toward me with fingers that bent backward at impossible angles. I lit a match. "You want in?" I screamed. "Come get me." I ran to the back of the RV, threw open the rear emergency window, barely large enough for me to squeeze through, but it would have to do, and started climbing. Behind me, I heard the whoosh of flames catching. The creatures outside started shrieking, a sound like metal scraping on stone. I was halfway through when the explosion hit. The blast threw me forward out of the window, tumbling through the air. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me, my ears ringing. Heat washed over me in waves as the RV became a fireball, orange flames reaching toward the black sky. I couldn't hear the creatures anymore, couldn't hear anything over the roar of the fire and the ringing in my ears, but I could see their silhouettes, dozens of them, backing away from the flames. They didn't like the fire. Good. I stumbled to my feet and ran. Into the forest, away from the lake, away from those things. Branches tore at my face and arms. Roots tried to trip me. Behind me, I could hear them following. Not running, but walking. Their wet footsteps squelching in the undergrowth. They weren't hurried. They knew I had nowhere to go. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs trembled with exhaustion, until I tripped over a fallen log and went sprawling in the dirt. I lay there, gasping, tasting blood and dirt and failure. The forest was dark around me, the moon hidden by the canopy. I'd lost all sense of direction. The ranger station could be anywhere. I could be running deeper into the woods, further from help, and I'd never know. Behind me, I heard singing, that same child's voice from the radio. Stella ran into the forest deep, where the shadows creep and crawl. Stella thought she'd find a way, but the lake claims one and all. I got to my feet and kept moving, though now it was more of a stumbling walk than a run. My body was giving out, adrenaline fading to leave me shaking and weak. I needed to find shelter, somewhere to hide until dawn. Maybe in daylight I could orient myself, find my way out. I saw it ahead, a small structure barely visible in the darkness. A hunting blind, maybe, or a ranger's shed. I stumbled toward it, hope flaring in my chest. The door was unlocked. I practically fell inside, pulling it shut behind me and leaning against it, my chest heaving. The structure was tiny, maybe 6 feet square, with a dirt floor and plywood walls. But it had a door and walls, and that was something. I waited, listening. The singing had stopped. The forest outside was silent. That same oppressive, wrong silence I'd noticed my first night. I stayed pressed against the door for what felt like hours, expecting at any moment for something to start scratching, for pale hands to appear in the cracks in the walls. But nothing happened. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear. I slid down the door to the floor and closed my eyes, just for a moment. I woke to daylight streaming through gaps in the walls. My body ached, my head pounded, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The hands, the creatures, the fire. I pushed the door open cautiously and looked outside. Morning forest, normal and peaceful. Birds were singing. Somewhere in the distance I heard the sound of running water. I was alive. I oriented myself using the sun and started walking east, toward where the road should be. My phone was gone, lost somewhere in my flight, but I didn't need it. I just needed to keep moving, to find the ranger station, to get help. It took me 3 hours of stumbling through the woods before I found the road. Another hour of walking before I saw the ranger station ahead, its brown walls and green roof the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The same ranger from before was at the desk. When he saw me, covered in dirt and scratches, my clothes torn, my hair wild, his face went pale. "Jesus Christ," he said, standing up. "What happened to you?" I tried to explain. The words tumbled out in a disjointed rush. The hands in the water, the mannequins on the shore, the creatures surrounding my RV, the fire. I knew how I sounded. Crazy, hysterical. A woman having a breakdown. The ranger listened, his expression growing more grim with each word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Wait here," he finally said. He made a call on his radio, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite hear. Then he grabbed keys from a hook on the wall and gestured for me to follow him. We drove to my campsite in his truck, neither of us speaking. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing, maybe evidence that I'd imagined it all. But as we rounded the final turn and the lake came into view, my breath caught. The RV was gone. Not burned, not destroyed, gone. The entire campsite looked untouched, as if no one had been there at all. The ground where the RV had been parked showed no tire tracks, no scorch marks. Nothing. The ranger parked, and we got out. He walked around the area, examining the ground, while I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. "This is where you were parked?" he asked. "Yes, right here." The RV exploded. There was fire and smoke, and he held up a hand, silencing me. Then he walked to the water's edge and crouched down. When he stood back up, he was holding something. A mannequin hand. Pale plastic, severed at the wrist. "We find these sometimes," he said quietly. "They wash up from the old sculpture park that used to be on the North Shore. Place shut down in the 80s after." He trailed off, then shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Point is, they're just trash. Plastic. Nothing supernatural about them. But the things I saw, they weren't plastic. They were real. They moved. They—" "Miss," he said, and his tone was gentle but firm, "you've been through something traumatic. The divorce you mentioned, the isolation out here, stress does things to the mind. Makes us see things that aren't there. I think you should see a doctor. Get checked out." "I'm not crazy," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "I didn't say you were. But Lake Jocassee, it has a way of getting into people's heads. The water's deep, the forest is old, and when you're out here alone, sometimes your mind fills in the silence with things that aren't real. You're not the first person this has happened to, and you won't be the last." He drove me back to the station, then to the hospital in the nearest town. They examined me, found minor cuts and bruises consistent with running through the woods, mild dehydration. No signs of assault, no evidence of any explosive device or fire. My blood work was clean, no drugs, no alcohol, nothing that would explain hallucinations. The official story became that I'd had a panic attack while camping alone, abandoned my RV in my confusion, and wandered into the woods. The rental company retrieved their vehicle from Site 17 3 days later. According to their report, it was undamaged, with the battery cables intact and functioning. I told myself they were right, that I'd had some kind of breakdown, that the stress of the divorce combined with the isolation had triggered something in my brain. It was easier to believe that than to believe in— what? Supernatural creatures that lived in a South Carolina lake? That was insane. I went home, went to therapy, got prescribed medication for anxiety. For a while, I almost convinced myself that the rational explanation was the true one. Then, 2 months later, I found it in my jacket pocket, the jacket I'd been wearing that night. I have no explanation for how it got there. I know I'd washed the jacket, emptied the pockets, but there it was, a photograph. It showed me, asleep in the RV bed on what I thought was my first night at the lake. The angle suggested it had been taken from above, through the skylight. I was clearly visible, clearly asleep, completely vulnerable. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible in the darkness, was a pale hand pressed against the glass. On the back of the photograph, written in handwriting I didn't recognize, were words that made my blood run cold. "Stella didn't really leave. She's down here with us. The one who thinks she escaped is just the lake's echo, walking around in Stella's skin." I looked up from the photograph, my hands shaking, and caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, my reflection smiled at me. Not the smile I was making, but a wider smile, stretching almost ear to ear. I don't look in mirrors anymore. I don't go near water, and sometimes, late at night, when I'm almost asleep, I can feel something cold and wet touching the back of my neck, and I hear that child's voice singing, "Stella thinks she got away. Stella thinks she's free. But Stella's at the bottom of the lake, and what came back is me." I want to believe I'm real. I want to believe I'm Stella, but the truth is, I don't know anymore. I have all of Stella's memories, Stella's thoughts, Stella's life, but sometimes I catch myself doing things I don't remember deciding to do, standing at the sink, staring at the running water for hours, waking up with mud on my feet and no memory of going outside, finding wet footprints leading to my bed, from my bed, circling my bed, as if something had been pacing there while I slept. The divorce is finalized now. I live alone. People say I've changed since my incident at the lake. They say I'm colder, more distant, that sometimes I don't blink for minutes at a time. They say that when I smile, it doesn't quite reach my eyes. I found myself booking a trip last week. The confirmation email arrived before I consciously decided to send it. A cabin rental at Lake Jocassee. Site 17 is available, it says, like it's been waiting for me. I'm looking at the confirmation now and I realize my hands are wet, dripping water onto the keyboard. I'm not sure where the water is coming from. I'm not sure it matters. The reflection in my computer screen is smiling, and I don't think it's me.